Amidst a desolate, snow-capped mountain range, a blizzard raged fiercely. A colossal white python slithered across the glacier, its mouth agape menacingly. A giant grizzly bear with vivid red scars on its face roared, shaking the ground. In the polluted sea, a giant mutated rat revealed its sharp fangs. An emperor with pale white hair tore at his hair in despair, his face etched with extreme agony. The silhouette of a muscular warrior stood amidst the blizzard, his eyes emitting a powerful blue light. A surge of purple energy flashed, signaling a threat even greater than the monsters. At the White Desert, a terrifying explosion shook the entire ice mountain range. A long-haired warrior descended from above, delivering a powerful kick to the scorpion monster below. The force of the impact created an energy explosion, blowing away snow and ice. A sinewy hand gripped the enemy's collar, tightly demonstrating unyielding strength. A bald, muscular warrior, clamped by the scorpion's pincers, screamed in pain. Someone walked steadily on the snow, their fur-lined boots indicating familiarity with the harsh land. The scorpion monster trembled, its bloodshot eyes staring straight ahead. A white-haired warrior swung his weapon with terrifying speed, purple slashes tearing through the air and ripping the monster apart. Another warrior lifted the giant scorpion off the ground, displaying extraordinary strength. The white-haired female teammate looked at the crude warriors with a disheartened gaze, silently sighing at their ignorance. She turned to the protagonist innocently, asking about an unfamiliar concept, while he could only sigh helplessly. Greta, the bald warrior, greedily gnawed on a piece of the recently defeated scorpion's carcass. He bit hard, causing the monster's green poisonous blood to splatter. The protagonist turned back, his eyes blazing when he saw Greta eating something he had strictly forbidden. He approached, a purple aura around him, flaring in anger, questioning his female teammate about Greta's reckless action. She and Greta merely gave a proud thumbs up, completely unaware of the deadly danger. The protagonist froze, astonishment and helplessness clearly visible on his face. Greta suddenly convulsed, his eyes rolling back and white foam bubbling from his mouth as the poison took effect. The female teammate screamed in horror as she saw Greta collapse, while the protagonist stood silently behind, a terrifying stillness about him. He bowed his head, bitter disappointment and regret engulfing him. The female teammate knelt, frantically shaking and slapping Greta's face, screaming in desperation to try and save him. Memories flooded back, taking him to the past, on a snowy peak on Earth, where he was just a solitary climber, beginning his journey. Memories flooded back, taking him to the day he stood on the highest peak of the planet, feeling as if he had conquered the world. He saw himself alone again before the night sea, realizing that even if he traveled to the ends of the world, he still wouldn't find what he yearned for. Amidst the endless cosmic space, his silhouette knelt, a desperate prayer forming in the silence. That prayer was answered by a blinding explosion of light, promising a fated change. The harsh reality returned, an escort struggling to advance through the endless blizzard. A soldier with a scar under his eye shivered from the cold, while his blonde leader ordered them to tighten their cloaks if they didn't want to freeze to death. A younger soldier questioned their insane decision, stating that crossing the White Desert was suicide. The blonde leader turned back, his dagger-sharp gaze silencing all complaints, reminding them that they had all agreed. The young soldier bowed his head bitterly, admitting that they had no idea how harsh this would be. Meanwhile, inside the warm carriage, an elderly butler crossed his arms, showing annoyance at the noise outside. The butler cleared his throat solemnly, adjusting his monocle. He turned to a young lady, his tone full of concern, as he inquired about her well-being. The blue-haired young lady smiled gently, signaling that she was fine. Milena Akasha, with elegance, reaffirmed her well-being, a complete contrast to the soldier's groans of cold. Through the window, the butler cast a disdainful glance at the suffering soldiers, remarking on their crudeness. Milena gently advised him not to be too harsh, reminding him that they were the only ones who dared to take on this task. Her eyes filled with worry as she suggested letting the soldiers inside to escape the blizzard. Another soldier collapsed from exhaustion amidst the white snow, his cries of pain swallowed by the wind. The butler raised a hand to stop her, his gaze stern as he began to explain the true dangers of this land. Milena listened, her hand on her lap, clenching slightly as he mentioned the legendary monsters. His story recalled the image of an ambitious emperor in splendid imperial robes, declaring his intention to conquer the White Desert. Leading his elite army, the emperor himself advanced into the desolate land full of confidence. Many years later, when the empire had fallen, only a solitary ragged figure returned from the dead land. The emperor's face was gaunt, aged by decades, his eyes vacant, like one who had witnessed the unimaginable. He revealed that the greatest threat was not monsters, but savage warriors, exuding a wild aura. A dark silhouette of a savage warrior appeared, his eyes glowing menacingly in the blizzard, an embodiment of legend. The butler concluded his story, dismissing it as nothing more than a wild legend. Milena looked out the window, her expression thoughtful, believing that the emperor's words from years ago could not be baseless. The butler smiled smugly, pointing out that while monsters might be real, no one had ever truly seen a savage. Milena Akasha thoughtfully acknowledged an uncomfortable truth. Amidst the white snow desert, a voice rang out, ordering the entire group to halt. The scarred soldier and the captain tensely looked forward, sensing a strange presence. From behind the captain, a solitary figure emerged amidst the blizzard. The captain's eyes widened in astonishment, sweat beading on his temples as he issued a warning. Facing the captain's silence, the scarred soldier and the young soldier grew impatient, demanding an answer. The strange figure did not stop but continued to walk straight towards them. The young soldier, Milena, and the butler all turned back with horrified expressions. To prepare for the confrontation, the captain's hand tightened on his sword hilt. He swallowed hard, tension clearly visible on his face. The figure approached, revealing the rippling muscular physique of a warrior. A mysterious energy swept through the stranger's black hair, turning completely white. His robust physique was adorned with a necklace made of animal bone. The white-haired man stood tall, his purple eyes glowing menacingly in the darkness. The scarred soldier realized the enemy was no ordinary person but a legendary savage. The white-haired man's glowing eyes swept over the group, a streak of purple light flashing. He faced the entire group of mercenaries, his presence completely overwhelming them. A smug and dangerous smile spread across the man's lips. He introduced himself with a dramatic bow. His name was Ketal, an ash savage. Ketal's gaze swept over the group, stopping at the carriages to scrutinize them. The captain, the scarred soldier, and the young soldier stood rooted to the spot, confirming their identity as mercenaries. Ketal rested his chin on his hand, issuing a veiled warning about turning back. The captain shivered, a wave of fear running down his spine. Ketal's knife-sharp gaze pierced through the carriage curtain, discovering Milena hiding inside. The captain froze, realizing his biggest secret had been exposed. Ketal smirked, clenching his fist as if he had just found a bargain. The captain and the young soldier were completely stunned by his offer to be hired. Ketal crossed his arms, reaffirming his intention to help them cross the desert with full confidence. The captain looked at his sworn enemy with suspicion, trying to find another motive behind this unbelievable offer. Ketal gave a confident smile, his demeanor implying a threat that if he wanted to, he could have annihilated them all. The captain and the young soldier were speechless at the stranger's arrogance. Lin Seo Mat looked anxiously at the captain, awaiting orders in the tense atmosphere. Lin Seo Mat's hand tightened around the axe handle, ready for a battle that could erupt at any moment. Inside the warm carriage, Milena Akasha slightly frowned upon hearing the chaotic sounds outside. She turned to the butler, who also appeared confused about what was happening. The captain reported with a tense expression, relaying the stranger's offer to be hired as a mercenary. Milena remained silent, her eyes distant as she considered this strange and risky offer. In her mind, Ketal's image appeared, his eyes emitting a menacing purple light, enveloped by a dangerous aura. She bowed her head, hesitation and worry etched deeply on her face. After a moment of decision, Milena lifted her head, her gaze becoming resolute, accepting a dangerous gamble. The captain received the order, bowed, and then resolutely turned and walked away. His feet sank deep into the snow, returning to where the confrontation began. Standing before Ketal, the captain relayed his master's decision. A smug and mysterious smile spread across Ketal's lips. His eyes flashed with a delighted purple light, as if everything was within his calculations. The captain and Lin's CO Matt were stunned by Ketal's unpredictable reaction. In a flash, Ketal closed the distance, appearing right in front of the captain. Ketal looked down at the mercenary with a condescending air signaling that he wanted to meet the decision-maker directly. The captain's fist clenched a silent warning issued against the insult. Ketal only responded with a challenging sneer, completely disregarding the threat. He casually turned his back on the stunned captain and walked straight towards the carriage. Lin's CO, Matt, frantically questioned the captain, not understanding why such a dangerous person was allowed to approach the young lady. The young soldier also appeared worried, believing they had to take action to stop Ketal. Leaving the chaos of the mercenary group behind, Ketal walked leisurely. Inside, the butler frantically spread his arms, trying to shield Milena as he saw the approaching figure. A knock on the door echoed. Milena's eyes widened in extreme surprise and tension. The butler let out a desperate cry, fear engulfing him. Milena clenched her hands, suppressing her fear, gathering all her courage to allow the person outside to enter. Amidst the snowstorm, a barbaric figure appeared with an arrogant smile and eyes glowing with a mysterious purple light. Inside the warm carriage, the old butler swallowed hard, worry evident on his face as he sensed the strange presence. The barbaric man crossed his arms over his chest, his posture exuding overwhelming confidence. He closed his eyes, his demeanor calm to the point of condescension, completely ignoring the surrounding tension. To quell the resistance, the barbaric man easily held the struggling, panicked butler, his gaze still calmly directed forward. Facing the intruder, Milena Akasha was stunned, realizing that the person before her was a legendary barbarian. In the cramped space of the carriage, Milena Akasha tried to maintain her dignity to begin the dialogue, while the stranger sat opposite her with the posture of a superior. The barbarian glanced around, a smile of amusement fleetingly appearing as he commented on the unusual warmth of the carriage amidst the cold snow. Milena Akasha briefly explained that the warmth was maintained by magic. The barbarian showed a subtly curious expression at the concept of magic, causing Milena a slight moment of confusion. Looking out the window, he issued a cold warning about the deadly dangers of this land, asserting that they could not survive on their own. Milena Akasha held her breath, knowing the warning was true. The butler flinched, having a bad premonition about the conditions that were about to be presented. Maintaining eye contact, Milena Akasha directly asked about the stranger's conditions ready for negotiation. A subtle smile appeared on his lips as he revealed his demand. He crossed his arms, declaring the price for his protection was all the information Milena Akasha possessed about the outside world. Milena Akasha fell silent as she repeated the strange request, trying to understand his intention. The barbarian smirked, asserting that this was a fair deal for both parties. Realizing she had no other choice, Milena Akasha sank into desperate contemplation. After a heavy silence, she bowed her head, a gesture of resigned acceptance. The barbarian smiled with satisfaction at her surrender, while the image of the butler, frozen in terror, reflected in his eyes. With a shred of dignity remaining, the girl introduced herself as Milena of the Akasha family. The barbarian responded with a smile that revealed his fangs, introducing himself as Ketal and expressing his anticipation for cooperation. The agreement was set, and Ketal's mind drifted to a modern room where a person yearning for a fantasy world once existed. Memories flooded back, taking him to the first moment he awoke in the body of a barbarian amidst an endless snowfield. To survive, he led his tribe, along with Greta and a white-haired female warrior, into brutal monster hunts. Throughout the long, arduous years, Ketal's sole goal was to find a way out of this icy prison. But all efforts shattered when he hit an invisible wall, an unbreakable barrier. Standing before a cold system interface, Ketal faced the harsh truth. He was trapped by an uncompleted quest. Memories flooded back, taking Ketal back to the days of being imprisoned in an endless white snow region by an invisible force where knights from the outside world sometimes appeared. The truth flashed in his mind, a cold drop of sweat trickling down his temple as he realized something horrifying. He stood on a snowy cliff, looking down at a lush, vibrant world below a world of magic and fantasy he had always yearned for. With the sole goal of surviving to escape, he plunged into battle with a giant lizard monster, a quest notification appearing before his eyes. He unleashed a powerful attack, purple energy engulfing him, as the notification confirmed the quest was complete, urging him forward. Back in the present, Ketal stood opposite Milena Akasha, assessing her carefully, noticing she was different from anyone he had ever met. The memory of the gaunt emperor screaming in madness flashed through Ketal's mind, a testament to the harshness of this place. Ketal crossed his arms, a rare look of relief appearing as he realized he could have a civilized conversation after a long time. He glanced at the carriages, his sharp eyes having noticed an important detail. Milena flinched, bewildered by Ketal's observational skills. Ketal explained indifferently that he could hear the sound of metal clashing from the carriages, an unmistakable sign of weapons. With a melancholic expression, Milena confirmed that the Empire and the Kingdom were at war. Her narration evoked the image of a fiery battlefield, where the Kingdom's soldiers were resisting the Empire's invasion. Milena raised her hand to explain, her face glowing with pride as she mentioned the border defenders, swordmasters, and heroes. Ketal's eyes lit up. He leaned forward, curiosity and a glimmer of hope evident on his face as he inquired further about their power. Milena was surprised. She asked Ketal again, as if he had just asked something obvious. But then she realized he knew absolutely nothing about the outside world. She began to explain hesitantly, admitting that her knowledge was also limited. Her explanation was illustrated with an image of a glowing energy body surrounded by 5 emblems, symbolizing 5 ranks of power. An image of a man in the shadows, sensing a green energy flow in his hand, appeared, illustrating the lowest rank. Next was an image of a blonde swordsman swinging his sword, energy enveloping him, signifying those who could wield power. Images of a knight and a hooded mage appeared, those who could transform power into mana or aura. A warrior stood before a colossal white dragon, symbolizing the transcendent rank of swordmasters, those who could dominate power. Finally, an image of a warrior with glowing green eyes appeared, representing heroes, a legendary existence. Milena finished her explanation, her hand on her chin, as she pondered the significance of these power ranks. After a moment of silence, Ketal looked directly at Milena, his gaze firm, making an unmistakable request. Memories of the despair of being trapped resurfaced, strengthening Ketal's resolve. He recalled the moment standing on the cliff, bound by a system notification, yearning for the outside world. Darkness fell, obscuring Ketal's eyes, leaving only an unshakable resolve on his face. A smirk full of confidence and defiance slowly appeared on Ketal's lips. Ketal looked at his own reflection, a clear determination to escape etched in his eyes. Outside, Milena Akasha's carriage rolled through the white snow, escorted by cloaked soldiers. Ketal acknowledged his barbarian identity, his sharp gaze showing he knew Milena recognized him. Milena Akasha confirmed she knew of him through legends, a hint of worry fleeting across her face. Ketal was surprised, his eyes widening, when he heard of a legend about himself. Milena Akasha was astonished, realizing Ketal was completely unaware of his own reputation. A memory of an emperor going mad in the snow flashed through Ketal's mind as he chuckled faintly, dismissing Milena's story. Ketal reassured Milena that she was not mistaken, confirming that there had been others like him who had come here before. He changed the subject, his gaze probing for Milena's reason for transporting weapons through this dangerous land. Milena Akasha was flustered, unsure how to answer Ketal's direct question. Bowing her head, she painfully confessed that her family needed a lot of money. Images of past wealth and current debt appeared as she explained this journey was to save her family. Ketal listened intently, his finger on his chin beginning to deduce her plan. Milena Akasha was stunned, unable to believe Ketal had accurately guessed her intention to sell weapons to the kingdom. Ketal explained his logic, images of the Empire's archer armies appearing to illustrate his argument. He continued to question, pressing Milena to admit that there was no other path to the kingdom. Milena Akasha raised a hand to her mouth, surprised to confirm that her territory bordered the Empire. She looked at Ketal with completely different eyes, suspecting the true identity of the man whom legends called a barbarian. Milena's skepticism peaked. She trembled as she realized the sharp intellect hidden behind Ketal's appearance. The carriage suddenly stopped with a screech, throwing everyone forward. The old butler turned back in a panic, shouting in shock. With an unseen movement, Ketal delivered a lightning-fast blow, knocking out the butler to silence him. Ketal crossed his arms, his gaze coldly directed outside, announcing that uninvited guests had arrived. Outside, a colossal black slug monster with glowing red eyes emerged from the snow, blocking the escort group's path. The blonde captain and Milena Akasha were simultaneously frozen in horror as they recognized the threat. Ketal remained calm, seemingly probing Milena's reaction to this creature. Milena Akasha, though frightened, confirmed that this was a monster recorded in ancient documents. Images of fallen warriors and ancient book pages appeared as she explained about the black slug monster. Milena Akasha looked directly at Ketal, asking if he knew about these records, her curiosity now overriding her fear. Ketal smiled, explaining with amusement, his hand on his chin, feigning expertise about a strange dish. Milena Akasha was stunned, her face paling in horror at his confession. She quickly waved her hand, refusing Ketal's provocative offer, her expression extremely awkward. Suddenly, a violent shockwave threw Milena back as the black slug monster emerged from the ground. Extreme horror was evident on the captain's face as he witnessed the sudden attack. In a panic, Milena turned towards Ketal, screaming his name as a desperate plea for help. In response, Ketal remained silent, his cold gaze showing absolute indifference to the plea. He slowly began to speak, starting to explain his decision not to act. Crossing his arms over his chest, Ketal coldly declared he would only intervene when there was a real danger threatening their lives. Tears welling up, Milena looked at him with anguish and confusion, unable to believe what she had just heard. A smug and calculating smile appeared on Ketal's face as he revealed his true purpose was to assess the strength of the outside world. Meanwhile, the black slug monster roared savagely, directly confronting the captain standing in front. Without hesitation, the captain roared a decisive command to his team. Lin Xiao Mat, the soldier, with a scar on his face, shouted in response to the command, ready to fight. He raised his shield to block the blow, but the shield instantly cracked under the monster's power. The tremendous impact pushed Lin Xiao Mat back his feet, plowing a long trail on the snow. Finally, he was thrown into the air by the unstoppable attack. Despite being knocked away, Lin Xiao Mat managed to twist in the air, swinging his weapon to counterattack. He fell heavily to the ground in a small explosion, lying motionless. His battle axe flew out, embedding itself deep into the frozen ground. The black slug monster roared triumphantly, turning its attention towards the captain. Realizing the defensive strategy had failed, the captain shouted a new command, ordering his teammates to spread out and coordinate. From within the ranks, Lin Tri Tuoi shouted back, confirming the order was received. He gripped his spear tightly, his eyes gleaming with determination. The young soldier put strength into his legs, pushing hard against the ground to gain momentum. He charged straight forward, a blur tearing through the white snow. With a powerful leap, Lin Tri Tuoi swung his spear, attacking the monster from above. The sharp spear blade cut a long line across the black slug monster's slimy body. Attacked by surprise, the monster roared wildly in pain, its eyes glowing with hatred. A soldier channeled energy into his spear, preparing for a decisive attack. The young soldier charged forward, his spearhead tearing through the cold snowy air, aiming directly at the enemy. But the black slug monster easily blocked the attack, its shadow looming over the astonished soldier. The creature threw another soldier away, while the young soldier fell helplessly onto the snow. Amidst the chaos, the captain roared a command, urging the remaining soldiers not to falter, but to continue attacking. Immediately, one of the monster's tentacles whipped out, powerfully striking the captain away. Realizing that conventional attacks were ineffective, the captain changed tactics, shouting an order for his men to aim for the hidden core inside the monster. In response to the command, streaks of blue light from coordinated attacks cut into the monster's body, from multiple directions. The captain gathered all his strength, raised his sword high to the sky, and unleashed a final slashlight, erupting from the weapon. The monster's red gem core shattered into pieces. The slimy body of the black slug monster disintegrated, leaving fragments of its core on the white snow. The surviving soldiers, though, still trembling, let out shouts of relieved victory. From inside the carriage, Milena Akasha sighed in relief, a faint smile of relief crossing her face. Ketal merely observed silently from afar, his face as cold as ice, revealing no emotion at their victory. Their joy was short-lived as a giant white wolf appeared, forcing the soldiers to immediately assume battle positions once more. A soldier gave a command directing his comrades to aim for the beast's weak point, its neck. The brave young soldier charged forward, swinging his weapon towards the giant wolf. At the same time, the scarred soldier also attacked from a flank, forming a pincer. Another soldier was splattered with the monster's blood, his face contorting in pain. After the battle, the young soldier reported to the captain, while an injured comrade was carried away behind them. He smugly asserted that the rumors about the dangers of this land were exaggerated. The captain immediately quelled his subordinate's complacency with a stern look and a warning that the danger was not over. The young soldier glanced towards the carriage, his eyes full of doubt, as he questioned Ketal's competence to his commander. In the soldier's mind, Ketal appeared as a useless parasite, only benefiting from their sacrifices. The young soldier continued suggesting that they should test the barbarian's skills, and a bead of sweat rolled down the captain's temple as he considered the audacious proposal. Sensing the rising tension, Milena looked out with a confused and worried expression. From inside the carriage, Ketal looked up, his sharp gaze indicating he was aware of the whispers and doubts directed at him. The young soldier decided to act, heading straight to the carriage to present the issue to Milena. He assertively argued that as those risking their lives, they had the right to demand that the hired protector prove his worth, leaving Milena stunned. Milena Akasha expressed her gratitude to the escort team, but the young soldier did not accept it. Milena Akasha's face was stunned upon hearing an unacceptable demand. The young soldier frankly pointed out the fact that Ketal, the so-called barbarian, had not participated in the battle. With a cold gaze, the young soldier made a bold proposal to allow him to challenge Ketal. Milena Akasha was stunned speechless at the proposal of a challenge. She turned to the captain, her eyes silently seeking help. The captain closed his eyes, helplessly admitting that he could not stop his subordinate. From the shadows, a smug and challenging smile appeared on Ketal's face. Ketal casually accepted the challenge, but then abruptly stopped, signaling that the time was not yet right. He stood upright, his gaze fixed on the distance, declaring that other guests had arrived first. The soldiers, including the young soldier, turned to look in the direction Ketal indicated, their faces bewildered and fearful. Two other soldiers also startled into alertness, not understanding what was happening. A giant white snake with glowing red eyes rose from the snow, its voice echoing menacingly. Dark energy emanated from the monster, signaling an impending massacre. Milena Akasha clutched her head, collapsing in extreme pain under the terrifying spiritual pressure. The scarred soldier and the others braced themselves against the overwhelming energy surge. Ketal stood firm, his cold gaze ordering the monster to retreat, declaring these people his guests. The giant snake recognized Ketal, questioning his presence outside the tribe's territory. Ketal's eyes flashed with purple light, and he dismissed the snake's questioning with authority. Challenged the snake roared furiously. It declared its identity as the snake barbarian, an assertion of status and power. The giant snake lunged towards Ketal, arrogantly refusing to obey. Ketal growled, deciding to teach the arrogant one a lesson. He shot into the air, delivering a devastating punch down onto the monster's head. The giant snake was struck by the punch, its body writhing in pain. A blue energy sphere formed at the point of impact, compressing destructive power. The scarred soldier screamed in horror as he felt the aftershocks of the attack. The energy sphere exploded, creating a blinding flash of light that engulfed the entire battlefield. Milena Akasha was thrown back by the shockwave, while the snake's defeated head lay motionless on the snow. Amidst the devastation, Milena stared in astonishment at Ketal, who merely asserted that he would quickly clear the battlefield. Ketal channeled energy into his heel, stomping hard on the ground, causing the earth to crack open in a dark purple aura. A massive pillar of energy erupted from the ground, sweeping away everything in its path. With terrifyingly glowing eyes, Ketal charged forward, his fists clenched, ready for the finishing blow. A blinding blue explosion engulfed the battlefield, marking the end of the confrontation. Streaks of blue light tore through the air, indicating an attack of terrifying speed. Shaken by the immense power, Milena and the butler could only watch in utter horror. After the battle, Ketal stood before the kneeling young soldier, accepting his plea with an understanding attitude without punishment. Memories returned to an earlier time when their carriage procession was slowly making its way through the vast white snow. Standing outside the carriage, the butler shivered from the biting cold, his eyes filled with worry. Inside the carriage, Ketal observed silently, his gaze calm yet scrutinizing. He turned to Milena, who appeared confused by his sudden attention. Ketal began to question his gaze, piercing Milena, demanding an explanation for her presence on this perilous journey. Milena faltered, beads of sweat forming on her forehead as she tried to find an answer. Regaining her composure, she placed a hand on her chest, solemnly revealing her identity as the daughter of a concubine in the Akasha family. A fleeting image appeared of her mother's sad past, a woman abandoned in a political marriage. Milena's fingers clenched her garment, her knuckles white with pain and helplessness, as she recounted her story. She bowed her head, regretting having revealed too many of her emotions and secrets. Ketal was slightly surprised when Milena admitted she had voluntarily participated in this dangerous mission. Milena raised her head, her eyes gleaming with iron determination, as she declared that someone had to set an example. A sharp and understanding smile briefly appeared on Ketal's lips. He had seen her true nature. Milena flinched, bewildered by Ketal's remark that she was ambitious and intelligent. She unconsciously stepped back, her heart pounding, as she was seen through so clearly. Ketal calmly turned away, ending the conversation, leaving Milena alone with her chaotic thoughts. Milena watched his retreating back, her gaze shifting from astonishment to a new understanding of this mysterious man. Returning to the present, the captain and the young soldier looked out with astonished expressions, signaling their arrival. Before their eyes, the snow had melted, giving way to a lush green valley under the warm sunlight. Standing at the boundary between the two lands, Ketal gestured to Milena and the butler, confirming that he had completed his escort mission. Amidst the snowy landscape, Milena Akasha spoke, seeking a deeper meaning in Ketal's earlier remark. She looked directly at him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her chest, her expression both curious and slightly tense. Ketal calmly reiterated his words, startling Milena and astonishing the butler standing behind her. In a sharp tone, he exposed the dire situation of her family and the truth that she was merely the child of a concubine. He continued to reveal her plan, a desperate attempt to seize power as her family was on the verge of collapse. Ketal's gaze was as sharp as a knife. He concluded his analysis with a challenging question, confident that he had seen through her heart. Milena was stunned. A cold drop of sweat trickled down her cheek. Her silence was her confession. A fleeting image showed Ketal standing next to a man in strange attire, a memory of a world far different from this one. Admiration appeared in Milena's eyes. She realized this barbarian's wisdom far surpassed anyone she had ever known. Seizing the opportunity, her eyes flashed with determination as she made a bold offer to recruit his strength. Ketal was slightly surprised by her directness. He politely declined his gaze, directed towards the carriage, indicating that he still had unfinished business to complete here. Undeterred, Milena removed a precious piece of jewelry from her collar. She respectfully offered the token with both hands, an investment in a future alliance. With a hopeful smile, she suggested he keep it as proof to seek out the Akasha family later. Ketal gave a cheerful smile, revealing a canine tooth, and agreed to accept the gift. They bowed to each other, an unspoken promise of a future reunion established between two ambitious individuals. Ketal stood alone in the snow, silently watching Mylena's carriage disappear behind the trees. 5 years passed the landscape, still an endless expanse of white snow. Suddenly glowing blue notification panels appeared in mid-air, signaling that the final conditions had been met. Standing before the notification, allowing departure, a sense of relief appeared on Ketal's face. He gave a satisfied smile, knowing that the journey he had long awaited could finally begin. Ketal stepped out of the snowy land, breathing the fresh air of a lush green forest for the first time. The life of the new world welcomed him through the sight of a white weasel and a deer drinking by the stream. He closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his lips, as he savored scents he had never known. Ketal opened his eyes, his gaze filled with vitality and excitement for what was to come. Turning his back on the icy mountain, a symbol of his confinement, he let out a roar of liberation. A vibrant and colorful fantasy world appeared, reflecting the dream he had longed for. The yearning for a fantasy world with magic, swordsmanship, dragons and elves burned in Ketal's mind. He took his first steps out of the harsh snowy plains, determined to survive, not just by will, but by desire. Suddenly he stopped, a shimmering light in the distance, catching his attention. The image of happy elves living in a magical place appeared in his vision. A radiant and hopeful smile lit up Ketal's face as he realized it must be a civilized village. Memories of his enigmatic barbarian companions, Greta and another female warrior, flashed through his mind, reinforcing his desire for true communication. He considered his approach, deciding to act courteously. With renewed determination, Ketal rushed down the hill towards the forest. At the same time, in a lush green forest, a towering ancient tree stood majestically under the brilliant sun. An elf elder extended his hand, declaring to his tribe that this would be their new home. Elf families carrying young children and belongings looked around with joy and hope. Standing on a large branch, the elf elder signaled for everyone to begin settling down, and the crowd cheered in response. A young blonde elf approached the elder with a worried expression. He expressed skepticism about the safety of this place. Around them, other elves had already begun building homes and working, trusting in the safety of the new land. The elder looked at the young elf, explaining that the danger from the nearby snowy plains was not a concern. With absolute confidence, he asserted that for thousands of years, nothing had escaped that snowy land. Images of ancient magical scrolls appeared, signifying a powerful barrier that had just been erected to protect the village. The elder mentioned the power of the elf queen as the ultimate guarantee for their safety. He smiled smugly, believing that no monster could breach their defenses. Meanwhile, as Ketal walked through the forest, his hand accidentally touched an invisible wall. He flinched, feeling something strangely torn apart. Brushing off his confusion, he continued to step forward. A rustling sound in the bushes made him stop abruptly, vigilant. A small elf child tumbled out from behind a tree, looking up in bewilderment. Ketal's eyes widened in astonishment as he realized he was facing a real elf. The image of a beautiful, ethereal elf queen appeared in his mind, a symbol of the legendary race he had always yearned to meet. A satisfied and joyful smile appeared on Ketal's face, feeling fortunate to be alive to witness this. With tear-filled eyes, the elf child trembled, looking around the unfamiliar forest, lost and afraid. Suddenly, the elf child froze, its entire body stiffening at an unexpected presence. Extreme terror was evident in the child's wide eyes as a dark shadow enveloped it. From the child's perspective, Ketal's colossal figure loomed out of the darkness, his eyes emitting a menacing purple glow. The elf child's body stiffened, as if petrified, speechless before the terrifying sight. Unable to bear it any longer, the elf child fainted, falling backward. Amidst the peaceful forest, flocks of white birds soared in the clear blue sky. Ketal knelt confused, supporting the unconscious elf child in his arms. He squinted, pondering, trying to figure out how to handle this awkward situation. Looking at the unconscious child, a decision formed in Ketal's mind. He would return it to its kind. In his mind, images of gentle and friendly elves appeared, a race of order and kindness. He imagined himself being joyfully welcomed by the elves as a benefactor after returning the child. A hopeful and expectant smile bloomed on Ketal's lips. With a confident expression, Ketal gently carried the sleeping elf child in his arms and began his journey. Ketal's joy suddenly vanished as he abruptly faced horrified screams from ahead. 2 elves, a guard, and a woman recoiled in horror and anger, pointing their spears directly at Ketal as an accusation. The elf woman cried out in despair, her hand reaching forward as if to reclaim her child. Elsewhere, the elf elder was stunned upon receiving the news, unable to believe that their protective barrier had been breached by a human. Shock quickly turned to fury. The elder spun around, roaring a question about the queen's whereabouts. Surrounded by hostility, Ketal raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture, trying to dispel the misunderstanding. Images of a group of heavily armed mercenaries appeared in the elder's mind. He believed Ketal's appearance was not accidental, but a deliberate attack. Ketal's expression froze. He realized his innocence had been mistaken for an act of kidnapping. His gaze sharpened, a clear determination, evident he had to resolve this situation. In Ketal's arms, the elf child began to stir, showing signs of waking up. The child's eyes slowly opened. Fully awake, the child's eyes widened, looking directly at Ketal with a bewildered expression. To prove his goodwill, Ketal gently placed the elf child firmly on the ground. Memories of the initial terrifying encounter flashed by a stark contrast to the current moment as the child stood before Ketal without trembling. Extreme horror was evident on the elf child's face, tears streaming down as it faced Ketal. The child struggled in Ketal's arms, causing the other elves, including the guard and the blonde woman, to scream in terror. Ketal froze, completely bewildered as to why his appearance caused such extreme fear. After returning the child, Ketal raised his hands, trying to signal that he was not an enemy before the elf elder and the others. Ignoring the explanation, the elf elder pointed at Ketal, roaring an attack command, believing the hostage had been released. Immediately, the elf archers simultaneously drew their bows' sharp arrows, aimed directly at Ketal. A rain of green magical arrows poured down, leaving Ketal to look up in utter bewilderment. Disappointment was evident on Ketal's face as he realized the stories of the gentle elf race were merely myths. In his mind, the ideal image of an ethereal elf queen living in harmony with nature appeared. But the harsh reality was the sight of a white wolf tearing apart its prey, a testament to the brutal law of survival. Facing reality, Ketal calmly used his hands and forearms to swat away the incoming arrows. Despite Ketal's defense, the rain of arrows did not cease, forcing him to look up at the sky with a determined expression. To end the attack, Ketal raised his hands and unleashed a massive surge of purple energy from his body. He clasped his hands together, his eyes glowing purple, focusing the energy into a single strike. A purple shockwave erupted from the ground, sweeping away everything around it. The elf soldiers braced themselves in vain, their faces contorted in horror at the unstoppable power. The entire elf formation was flung into the air, screaming amidst the crumbling earth and rock. The energy wave continued to spread, leveling a vast area of the forest. The terrifying explosion swept through, leaving behind a desolate landscape. The elf elder's staff broke in half, and he stared in stunned silence at the scene of destruction before him. From the edge of the deep crater, the elf elder stared in horror down at Ketal, standing tall at the epicenter he himself had created. Ketal clasped his hands together, a gesture of apology after accidentally displaying excessive power. Suddenly, a fiery arrow tore through the air, hurtling straight towards Ketal from another direction. The fiery arrow grazed past Ketal's face. He turned his head to follow it with a look of surprise. It embedded itself in the ground and exploded into a fierce fireball, shaking the entire area. The elf elder and the young elf beside him could only gape, completely bewildered by the sudden turn of events. From afar, on a rocky outcrop, a neatly braided lock of golden hair fluttered in the wind. The warrior sandal-clad feet of a mysterious figure stood firm, signaling the arrival of a new force. The regal silhouette of Elf Queen Elindus Kainasia emerged majestic amidst nature as a cry of astonishment rang out. The elf elder angrily reported to his queen that they had been attacked by a human. Elindus narrowed her eyes, disappointment and cold determination etched on her face as she gripped her bow. Amidst the dust and smoke, Ketal stood firm, raising his hands as a gesture pleading for calm so he could explain. Elindos was momentarily stunned by his appearance. The elf elder gaped in horror, unable to believe that Ketal was completely unharmed after the attack. Standing on a rocky outcrop, Elindos looked down at Ketal, her gaze concluding he was a powerful enemy targeting them. Her eyes filled with contempt, reinforcing her prejudice against humans. Elindos drew an arrow, declaring her authority as queen of the Leaf tribe. She looked directly at Ketal, her knife-sharp gaze uttering a silent accusation. She drew her bow, the arrow flaring with fiery energy, a declaration of war, allowing no dialogue. Ketal was perplexed, wondering why all his attempts at communication were met with such hostile disregard. In his mind, the image of a colossal monster bear appeared a symbol of primal power. Memories of a harsh lesson flashed his eyes, glowing with a decisive purple hue. In response, Elindos channeled her full power into the bow, a surge of blue energy swirling around the arrow. She focused intensely, preparing to unleash her most powerful attack. The energy arrow was fired, tearing through the air with a blinding blue streak. The arrow transformed in mid-air, becoming a colossal energy wolf, roaring as it lunged towards Ketal. Ketal stood firm, unfazed by the overwhelming magical attack. He clenched his fist, dark purple energy converging around his hand. A deadly decision had been made. In retaliation, Ketal threw a punch directly into the heart of the energy storm. The two surges of power collided, creating a blinding explosion of light that tore apart both attacks. Elindos froze, her eyes wide with horror, as she witnessed her ultimate attack being effortlessly neutralized. Ketal looked at his fist in surprise, momentarily realizing he had accidentally used too much force. The aftershock from his punch created a terrifying explosion, sweeping away a vast area of the forest. Elindos collapsed amidst the devastated land, exhausted and utterly defeated. Ketal scratched his head, a remorseful expression on his face, as he realized the destruction he had just caused. From behind the astonished Elindos, a black-haired warrior in armor appeared, calmly assessing Ketal's extraordinary power. With a tense face, Elindos Kainasia issued an urgent command, ordering everyone to leave immediately. The surrounding elves froze in astonishment and fear at the queen's unexpected command. Elindos screamed, urging her people to flee immediately, determination etched on her face. A panicked elf soldier turned and fled, obeying the queen's command. Facing Ketal, Elindos gritted her teeth, her eyes conveying an uncompromising declaration of war. Ketal could only shrug with a bewildered expression, realizing the situation had completely spiraled out of control. Elindos closed her eyes, her hands beginning to form seals, concentrating on chanting, as a fiery aura enveloped her. Her eyes snapped open, sharp and full of power, signaling the completion of the summoning ritual. She unleashed a colossal energy orb, its heat distorting the very air. From within the fiery vortex, a majestic creature in the form of a blazing bull emerged. Ketal's eyes widened in surprise, a smile of delight spreading across his lips as he witnessed the summoning. In his mind, images of the dark, hideous monsters from his homeland resurfaced, a complete contrast to the creature before him. Piego stood tall, its entire body a living mass of fire, exuding the majestic aura of an ancient spirit. Ketal held his breath, his eyes sparkling, completely captivated by this fantastical sight. Elindos looked directly at the creature, her lips moving to command Piego to destroy the enemy before them. Piego snorted arrogantly, showing annoyance, as if obeying the covenant was a nuisance. Elindos frowned, her gaze turning cold as she repeated the command sharply. Memories of the covenant ceremony witnessed by the elders suddenly flooded her mind. With a decisiveness that allowed no refusal, Elindos forced Piego to fulfill the covenant. Piego reluctantly turned its head towards Ketal, the rocks beneath its feet beginning to crack. Suddenly, the fire spirit froze, its eyes widening as it sensed something unusual. Ketal inadvertently revealed his true nature, his eyes emitting a mesmerizing purple light and a savage smile appearing on his lips. Piego was utterly horrified, sweat pouring out as it realized what it was facing was not an ordinary human. Ketal clasped his hands together, his face returning to the innocence and excitement of a child. He looked at Piego blankly, completely not understanding why it was staring at him. Piego roared in contempt, deciding that its pride would not allow it to back down. Ketal still maintained a bewildered expression, not understanding why the magnificent creature was hostile towards him. Despite its fear, Piego roared once more and charged straight towards Ketal, determined to incinerate its enemy. Obeying the command, the fire spirit, Piego roared and charged a living fireball aimed directly at the target. The fiery monster tore through the air, determined to incinerate its master's enemy. Facing that terrifying power, Ketal remained unusually calm, with no intention of defending himself. A violent explosion occurred as Piego's attack hit its target. Pushed back by the shockwave, Elindas braced herself, believing the enemy had been annihilated. But as the dust settled, she was shocked to realize Ketal was still standing completely unharmed. Without hesitation, Ketal swung his hand and firmly grabbed the horn of the charging Piego. Facing the monster, Ketal's eyes gleamed with amusement instead of fear. A smug and challenging smile spread across Ketal's lips as he faced the fire spirit. His eyes flared with a terrifying purple light, and Ketal easily blocked the attack with just one hand. Witnessing the unbelievable sight, Elindas was stunned horror, beginning to consume her mind. To end the game, Ketal clenched his fist, channeling all his power into a single blow. His punch collided with Piego, creating a blinding explosion of light. The power of the punch generated a massive fireball engulfing Piego entirely. The shockwave spread, leveling a vast area of forest into flat ground. The explosion spread far and wide, forming a mushroom cloud in the sky, a testament to destructive power. The ground trembled, trees crushed under the might of the single attack. Thrown back by the aftershock, Elindas screamed in horror and helplessness. The power of the punch easily overwhelmed Ketal, causing him to be pushed back as well. When everything settled, Elindas trembled, kneeling on the ground, disbelieving the devastation before her eyes. A colossal crater, silent proof of the punch's destructive power, appeared before her. Ketal stood at the edge of the crater, his towering figure completely overwhelming Elindas's spirit. In despair, Elindas bowed her head in supplication, not daring to look directly at her conqueror. She pleaded with him to spare her people, a queen's pride completely shattered. Ketal stood towering over her, his voice ringing out, firmly asserting that he was not an enemy. Elindas snapped her head up, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Completely bewildered by Ketal's declaration, she could only sit there, her mind blank. After the confrontation, the hostility vanished, giving way to a reluctant understanding between the two. With a deeply apologetic expression, Elindas Kainasia bowed her head, placed on her chest to show remorse. She bowed lower, admitting that they had attacked the wrong person who had saved their tribe's child. Ketal offered a forgiving smile, but his eyes held a hint of disappointment at not having had a chance to explain. Elindas looked up, her eyes still skeptical, probing to ensure he was not the enemy pursuing them. Ketal calmly explained that this was the first time he had seen an elf, as there were none where he lived. Elindas's eyes widened, extreme astonishment evident as she processed the information she had just heard. Ketal affirmed his identity, claiming to be the Ash Barbarian of the Wasteland, a name outsiders had given him. Elindas took a step back, skepticism and astonishment rising to their peak on her face. She clenched her hands anxiously, asking if others could also escape that dead land. Ketal glanced down, shaking his head decisively, indicating doubt about that possibility. An image of a colossal, ferocious white serpent appeared, illustrating the powerful creatures imprisoned in the wasteland. Ketal explained that he was an exception, having been able to leave due to a special mission. Ketal's gaze sharpened, concealing a truth known only to him. Elindas breathed a sigh of relief, then cautiously inquired about the fate of the creature she had summoned. Ketal scratched his cheek, awkwardly admitting that he had torn that ox in half. Elindas explained that it was a spirit, and it would simply return to its own world. To atone, Elindas straightened up her neatly braided hair in place and made a solemn offer. Ketal mumbled the word spirit, a completely new concept to him. He rested his chin on his hand, his eyes lighting up with calculating curiosity as he posed an important question. Elindas hesitated, her eyes showing a hint of reluctance as she admitted that it was almost impossible. She explained that only humans with a deep connection to nature had a chance, but it was extremely rare. Elindos's face fell her silence, serving as confirmation of that difficulty. After a moment of thought, Elindos looked up, offering an unexpected solution to go to the sacred land of Elfo Sagrado. An image of a colossal, brilliantly glowing world tree appeared where Elindos said it could become a reality. Ketal pointed to himself with amused skepticism, wondering if a human would be welcomed in the elf tribe's sacred land. Elindos affirmed that with her introduction, he would be accepted, asking him to keep it an absolute secret. She spread her arms, an aura flaring around her, as she solemnly revealed the name of the sacred land. The silhouette of a large, menacing guardian with glowing red eyes appeared, symbolizing the dangers the elf tribe faced to protect their sacred land. A brilliant red crystal brimming with energy hovered above Marsalia Hassian Karushia's palm. With eyes full of trust, Marsalia handed the crystal to Ketal as a pledge. Ketal carefully received the gift, his strong hand enveloping hers. Marsalia's warning evoked the image of a powerful deer god hovering in the night forest with an orb of energy in its hand. Nevertheless, a confident and warm smile appeared on Marsalia's face, showing her belief that he would overcome the challenge. She solemnly placed her hand on her chest, officially introducing her identity as queen, before turning her expectant gaze towards Ketal. Ketal smiled back a confident smile as he stated his identity. Without a word of farewell, Ketal channeled power into his feet, the ground beneath his heels cracking. He shot away like an arrow, leaving a blur and scattered debris behind him. Amidst the vortex, he created Ketals, blazed with powerful purple light. The forest scenery was just blurred streaks as he swept past. From above, his figure resembled a meteor streaking past the treetops. At the border of the Varkan territory, a soldier startled into alertness, trying to identify the source of the unusual approaching sound. Recognizing the threat, the captain of the Varkan guards roared an alarm command, his voice echoing throughout the city walls. A dazzling streak of light from the sky plunged straight down into the forest, right before the city gate, trailing white smoke. He landed with a powerful impact, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. As the dust slowly cleared, Ketal's muscular figure emerged, towering and motionless. The soldiers took a step back, their faces changing from astonishment to utter horror. Contrary to their panic, Ketal calmly brushed off dust, speaking in a serene tone, as if taking a stroll. Looking down from above, Ketal stood alone, facing the soldiers' defensive formation. The captain turned to the soldier beside him, whispering to confirm that this stranger was the cause of the recent tremor. Ketal tilted his head, a fleeting look of confusion appearing on his face at their fearful reaction. The captain's gaze swept over Ketal's ash-colored hair and the scars on his chest, a terrifying realization beginning to form in his mind. In his mind, the legendary image of the Ash Barbarian appeared, a solitary figure amidst the vast white snow desert. Ketal took a step forward, breaking the tense silence. Immediately, the soldiers simultaneously raised their weapons, forming a trembling yet resolute defensive barrier. Ketal calmly raised a hand, a gesture indicating he had no hostile intentions, and wished for them to lower their weapons. Though still tense, the captain held his ground, his scrutinizing gaze demanding an explanation for Ketal's presence. A gloved hand lightly touched his chest, as if in confirmation. Ketal pointed straight ahead, his gaze resolute, signaling his presence. The guard captain startled and turned around, his face bewildered by the sudden appearance. The guard looked towards the sturdy city wall, not understanding what was happening. With a calm demeanor, Ketal straightforwardly requested entry into the territory. The captain and another guard exchanged glances, completely unprepared for the situation. In the interrogation room, Ketal rested his chin on his hand, stating his intention to stay for a while. Facing the note-taking captain, he introduced himself as Ketal. When asked for identification, Ketal calmly admitted he had none. He suddenly paused, a memory of an encounter flooding back. Milena Akasha, with a grateful expression, handed Ketal a shimmering emblem as a token. Ketal gripped the emblem tightly, a warm light emanating from his palm. Returning to the present, Ketal placed the Akasha family emblem on the table as proof of identity. The captain was startled, bending down to get a closer look at the unfamiliar object. Ketal explained that it was the Akasha family emblem he had received from a family member. The captain picked up the emblem to examine it, recognizing the name of this powerful merchant family. A pensive look appeared on the captain's face, as he confirmed the emblem did not belong to his kingdom. After some consideration, he placed the emblem down, agreeing to let Ketal in, but with a condition. Ketal raised an eyebrow, a hint of curiosity at the stated condition. The captain clasped his hands together, his gaze stern, explaining that they needed to confirm Ketal was not a threat. He revealed that another group of 3 strangers was also waiting to enter the territory. Ketal rested his chin on his hand, in thought, realizing this condition was easier than he had imagined. With a confident smile, Ketal patted his chest, accepting the agreement, but his eyes indicated he also had his own demands. An image flashed through his mind, showing the binding condition: Ketal must report every detail after the mission. A smirk flickered on Ketal's lips. He had seen through the captain's plan to use strangers to monitor each other. The captain broke out in a cold sweat, astonished by the sharpness of the person opposite him. Ketal crossed his arms confidently, asserting his barbarian identity without hesitation. A look of astonishment and contemplation was etched on the captain's face. His prejudice against barbarians completely crumbled. Guard Captain Varkand decisively placed his hand on the table, ending the conversation with Ketal and signaling it was time to act. Sitting in a corner, Alessandro Tyrannus sighed, his face clearly showing dissatisfaction at having to accept a mission he considered beneath him. His face was etched with contempt, considering himself a noble paladin. The rogue Kassan Hark sat opposite, smirking insolently and directly provoking Alessandro. Anger flared. Alessandro spun around, his eyes blazing at Kassan's insult. Kassan leaned back, his contemptuous smile widening his sharp gaze, seemingly stripping away Alessandro's arrogance. Alessandro gritted his teeth, his fists clenching at the insult. Kassan continued to taunt, lightly tapping the mission paper, as if mocking Alessandro's very name. Unable to endure it any longer, Alessandro sprang up, his hand gripping his sword hilt. Kassan did not flinch. His hand was already on the dagger at his hip, a challenging smile on his lips. Kassan's cold, sharp dagger blade glinted green poison, dripping from its tip, revealing his deadly intent. Alessandro tightened his grip on his sword, preparing to attack. 2 blades were about to clash in a deadly spark. Suddenly, a figure rushed between them, arms outstretched to stop the impending brawl. The priestess Hayes stood between the 2 men, sighing wearily, her eyes revealing her exhaustion and concern for the group's future. All 3 stood in silence, awaiting the final member in a heavy atmosphere. Hayes bowed her head, her hand fiddling with the cross on her neck, unease clearly visible on her face. The creak of the door opening drew her attention. Guard Captain Varkand stood at the door, announcing the arrival of the final member. A pair of fur-lined boots stepped over the threshold. A colossal figure bent down to pass through the doorway, his glowing purple eyes in the darkness, exuding a terrifying aura. Ketal straightened up, his towering stature immediately dominating the room, leaving the other 3 speechless. He flashed a radiant smile, a complete contrast to his overwhelming presence. Alessandro swallowed hard, his eyes clearly showing astonishment at Ketal's massive physique. Hayes gasped, fear evident on her face. Even Kassan, always self-satisfied, had to grit his teeth, feeling an invisible pressure weighing down on him. Ketal cheerfully waved to his new teammates. Guard Captain Varkand quietly turned and left, leaving the disparate mercenary group to sort themselves out. Ketal broke the silence, flashing a confident smile and spreading his arms as an invitation for introductions. He directed his gaze towards a teammate who, startled and awkwardly, when asked for his turn, stammered to introduce himself as Kassan Hark, a rogue. A paladin named Alessandro Tyrannus crossed his arms, clearing his throat solemnly to draw attention before introducing himself. When Ketal asked about divine power, Alessandro sweated awkwardly, trying to excuse his inability to use it. A priestess named Hayes stepped forward, placed her hand on her chest, and smiled, introducing herself as a servant of a god of deceit. Ketal raised an eyebrow, his eyes showing curiosity at her contradictory identity. Hayes awkwardly admitted that her god was not well liked by others. The room door opened, revealing a motley group of mercenaries standing and waiting. Guard Captain Varkan entered, his face stern, announcing that it was time to depart. Ketal and Alessandro turned to look, their expressions becoming serious. Hayes and Kassan also directed their attention towards the captain. Guard Captain Varkan announced that the mission had been confirmed. Ketal let out a soft sound of amusement, ready for the challenge. The captain pointed towards the exit, signaling for the group to follow him to the dungeon entrance. Standing at the dungeon entrance, he explained that it was a 3-story dungeon filled with undead. With a confident smile, Guard Captain Varkan ordered them to clear the dungeon and bring back proof. Ketal turned to Kassan, his gaze entrusting the thief with the responsibility of planning, which startled Kassan. Ketal laughed loudly, patting Kassan's shoulder in a friendly manner to ease the formality, encouraging him to relax. Kassan cleared his throat, regaining his professional demeanor, and began to outline the strategy. He assigned tasks, designating Ketal and Alessandro as vanguards, while he himself would scout for traps. Kassan raised a finger, emphasizing Hayes' versatile support role from the rear. Ketal cheerfully approved the plan, while Kassan awkwardly scratched his head at the easy agreement. With the formation set, Ketal led the group, boldly ordering them to enter the dungeon. All 4 stepped through the stone gate, entering the deep darkness of the dungeon, Kassan having pulled a scarf to cover the lower half of his face. Inside, Hayes nervously clutched the holy symbol around her neck as darkness enveloped them. Kassan scanned his surroundings, the dungeon's unusual silence putting him on high alert. His gaze halted, discovering something the others had not yet noticed. Kassan suddenly raised a hand to stop Ketal, his tense gaze signaling imminent danger. Inside a dark cave, Kassan Hark pointed to the bone fragments on the floor, his eyes warning the group about the skeletons that would rise to attack. Kassan's eyes narrowed in bitter realization. He understood that this dungeon was a trap set to eliminate them. Ketal brought a hand to his chin, a curious expression on his face, as he heard about the threat from the skeletons. Kassan continued to explain, emphasizing that these skeletons were extremely durable and would not stop moving even when severely wounded. A skeleton enveloped in ghostly blue energy began to rise, proving the warning about the dungeon's difficulty. Sensing imminent danger, Kassan turned to order Hayes to prepare her magic and Alessandro Tyrannus to ready his shield. Alessandro obeyed, his face tense, as he prepared for the upcoming battle. Kassan outlined the tactics, signaling to Ketal that the skeleton's weakness was its neck and that it would require multiple attacks to defeat them. Ketal nodded decisively and stepped forward, ready to face the challenge. The clattering sound of bones echoed as a skeleton began to move on the ground. A smile of amusement flickered across Ketal's face as he observed his enemy. With eyes glowing a deadly blue, the skeleton stood up, completely clutching a pickaxe. Alessandro immediately raised his shield, assuming a solid defensive stance. Hayes clasped her hands before her chest, a warm golden aura beginning to emanate around her as she chanted. Kassan drew his dagger, ready to rush in for flank support. Ketal raised a hand, signaling his teammates to stand still, his eyes indicating he would handle it himself. The skeleton swung its sword down with powerful force, aiming directly at Ketal. With incredible speed, Ketal raised his bare hand and blocked the incoming blade. Immediately, he delivered a thunderous punch directly to the skeleton's skull. Ketal's punch crushed the skull into pieces, causing it to disintegrate into dust in the air. Alessandro's mouth hung open in horror, his eyes wide in disbelief at the scene that had just unfolded. Standing side by side, Kassan and Hayes were also stunned, completely overwhelmed by Ketal's extraordinary strength. Ketal turned back, a smug smile evident on his face. He cheerfully looked at Kassan, nodding to confirm that taking down the head of the skeleton had indeed stopped its movement. Kassan was speechless, sweat pouring down his face as he realized how literally Ketal had taken his advice. Trying to regain his composure, Kassan re-explained with gestures, emphasizing that he meant to continuously attack the cervical vertebrae, not crush the entire thing. Kassan's gaze became pensive, He silently admitted that Ketal's strength far exceeded all his calculations and imagination. Amidst the group's stunned silence, Ketal curiously bent down to pick up a broken skull fragment for examination, surrounded by the remaining bone dust. Ketal confidently walked through the dark dungeon, leading the group. With a smug smile, he gestured for his hesitant teammates to continue forward. Behind him, Casan Hark Hayes and Alessandro Tyrannus recoiled in surprise, bewildered by the barbarian's nonchalance. Ketal turned back, a hint of surprise on his face at their exaggerated reaction. Suddenly, his foot struck something hard, a skull rolling on the ground. He lost his balance and fell backward, causing his teammates to look down in horror. Ketal's gaze was fixed forward, where countless skeletons were shambling up from the darkness. Hayes' eyes widened in horror as she realized the deadly threat surrounding them. Casan Hark tightened his grip on his dagger, his eyes sharpening with vigilance. Alessandro Tyrannus raised his shield, his voice rising into an urgent warning for the group. To reassure his teammates, Ketal made a proposition, his eyes gleaming with absolute confidence. He stepped forward, declaring he would handle the skeletons alone, to test his strength, making the other three reluctantly agree in fear. A mysterious smile appeared on Ketal's lips, his eyes flashing with powerful purple light. He turned his back to his teammates, facing a skeleton wielding a great sword alone. From behind, Casan Hayes and Alessandro watched his back, completely bewildered by what he intended to do. Ketal stared at the approaching skeleton, his face devoid of fear, only curious amusement. The skeleton swung its great sword down with immense force, aiming directly at Ketal's head. In an incredibly swift movement, Ketal leaned back, using his bare hand to block the sharp blade. He looked directly into the skeleton's empty eye sockets, a challenging smile evident as he held its weapon firmly. The skeleton tried to pull the sword back, but it didn't budge, held tightly in Ketal's hand. A sound echoed as Ketal sprang up, easily disarming the skeleton. He lightly tapped the blade with his other hand, a metallic sound ringing out. A fleeting look of surprise crossed Ketal's face. It seemed he hadn't expected the weapon to be so hard. The monster's bony hand still gripped the weapon, creating a hopeless tug-of-war. A mischievous smile reappeared. Ketal decided to end this game. With a low growl, his fingers tightened, crushing the hard metal blade into fragments. Ketal looked in surprise at the glittering metal fragments in his palm. It seemed even he hadn't fully anticipated his own strength. The skeleton stood motionless, its two empty arms outstretched, utterly bewildered by the incredible sight. The blue light in the skeleton's eye sockets flashed with a deadly gleam. Suddenly it shifted the sword to its other hand, swinging an unexpected attack. The skeleton's sword swung up, forming a deadly arc to block a counterattack. Ketal smiled with amusement, recognizing his opponent's cunning. Undaunted, the skeleton charged again, its sword raised high, ready for a finishing blow. With incredible speed, Ketal seized its bony wrist, stopping the attack. He used sheer strength, slamming the skeleton to the ground, causing it to lose its balance. The monster's leg bones snapped after the brutal impact. Scrambling to its feet, the skeleton stubbornly lunged forward despite its injuries. Ketal stood still, waiting for the enemy to come within his reach. To end the match, Ketal delivered a sky-shattering punch, shattering the skeleton's skull with a look of astonishment and delight. Witnessing the scene, Hayes paled, raising a hand to cover her mouth to stifle a horrified scream. Beside her, Alessandro Tyrannus and Casan Hark froze, stunned by the sheer violence. Ketal stood there, his hand still gripping the headless torso of the skeleton, a look of self-satisfaction evident on his face. He glanced at Casan Hark, his eyes gleaming with a strange light that startled the other man. The monster's shattered skull fell onto the cold stone floor. Ketal bent down to look at the head, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. He used his foot to hold down the wriggling skull, a smile of amusement on his lips. Done, Ketal dusted off his hands, turning back to face his teammates with a friendly smile, as if nothing had happened. Casan Hark frantically waved his hands hastily, indicating that he dared not complain about the delay. Ketal took a step forward, dust lightly rising beneath his boots. With a decisive gesture, he signaled for the group to continue forward, his face full of confidence. Ketal's feet suddenly stopped. The group stopped looking ahead, with serious expressions, sensing a change in the atmosphere. They had reached the edge of a stone staircase, leading down to a deeper and darker basement. Ketal and Alessandro exchanged a silent, unspoken understanding. Hayes clutched the symbol of faith around her neck, an unconscious act seeking protection. Cassan Hark lightly pulled down his face, exhaling a long breath to calm his chaotic mind. Inside the dark cave, Ketal stopped, signaling to the group that they needed a break. After a moment of thought, he nodded, confirming his decision was correct. Cassan Hark let out a long sigh of relief, his face showing clear relief and gratitude. Ketal calmly sat down, closing his eyes to regain his strength. The entire group, including Cassan Hark Hayes and Alessandro Tyrannus, sat down in exhaustion, and Ketal began to speak. Hayes and Alessandro Tyrannus turned their eyes filled with surprise at Ketal's unexpected question. Ketal laughed frankly, admitting his lack of knowledge on the matter. Hayes, though a little confused, still gestured that she was willing to explain. A fleeting image of a peaceful village appeared, illustrating the explanation of the dungeon's location. Ketal listened intently, his face thoughtful as he considered the danger from monsters. Hayes explained reassuringly, but her expression showed a slight hesitation when mentioning exceptions. Cassan Hark cleared his throat, preparing to join the discussion to clarify further information. An image of a dark, pristine cave appeared to illustrate a type of dungeon. Cassan Hark continued to explain, as an image of a blazing red tower under a stormy sky appeared, illustrating another type of dungeon. Ketal nodded, appearing to have understood why dungeons often appear near populated areas. Hayes continued to explain the process local lords used to dispatch mercenaries to clear dungeons. A smile of amusement spread across Ketal's lips as he heard that. Ketal asked the group why dungeons always appeared at a certain distance from territory. Ketal's eyes lit up, and he eagerly clenched his fists as he asked about the reward for conquest. Hayes confirmed, her face contemplative about the reward's value, while an image of a skeletal boss and golden treasure flashed. A knowing smile appeared on Ketal's face, and he mumbled something only he could hear. Hayes curiously asked about his mumbling, but Ketal just turned away and brushed it aside. Ketal turned back to Hayes, his gaze becoming more serious, preparing for another question. Ketal's question left Hayes completely stunned and confused. She awkwardly tried to explain again that no one created dungeons. They were simply natural phenomena. Symbolic images flashed in her mind, a hand controlling puppets, a snake tempting with treasure. Ketal looked directly at Hayes, his gaze sharp as he asserted that a natural phenomenon could not have such clear intent. Hayes was stunned, her hand unconsciously rising to cover her mouth as she realized the terrifying truth in Ketal's argument. Hayes pondered, hand on chin, realizing an obvious truth she had never doubted. Cassan Hark bowed his head, his eyes thoughtful, admitting to himself that he had never questioned it either. He pondered the prejudice that barbarians were all wild and ignorant. A towering barbarian figure appeared in his mind, standing on a pile of corpses, cruel and emotionless. But when confronted with reality, Cassan wondered if Ketal was truly a typical barbarian. A spark of interest flashed in Cassan's eyes as he realized the complexity of his teammate. Ketal smiled brightly, interrupting everyone's thoughts to ask if they had rested enough. The group startled and turned surprised by his sudden voice. With an energetic gesture, Ketal declared it was time for them to set off again. Led by Ketal, the group advanced into the darkness, each person's expression becoming serious. They cautiously ventured deeper into the dark cave, which sparkled with mysterious crystals. Suddenly, Ketal stopped, his eyes gleaming with surprise. Before them was a wooden treasure chest, gold-rimmed, emitting an inviting glow. Cassan explained it was the maze's reward, then gestured that Ketal could take it if he could unlock it. In his mind, Cassan realized that opening such an intricate lock required a master thief. Ketal turned to Cassan, asking him to open the chest, which completely bewildered the thief. With absolute innocence, Ketal pointed at the chest, then at Cassan. Sweating coldly, Cassan awkwardly admitted his role as a thief. Ketal clenched his fists, his eyes shining with excitement, eager to witness a thief's skills firsthand. Cassan realized Ketal's logic wasn't wrong, but there was a fatal problem. He panicked in his thoughts, realizing he had absolutely no lockpicking skills. Despair exploded in his mind. Cain silently screamed about his incompetence. He feared he couldn't confess the truth to his expectant teammate. Cain looked at Ketal's childlike eager face, feeling the pressure weighing heavily on his shoulders. He imagined Ketal's cold gaze judging his uselessness. An image of a shattered skull flashed through Cain's mind, symbolizing the collapse of his honor. Forcing a smile to hide his extreme panic, Cain scratched his head and reluctantly agreed to try. Cain felt a cold shiver run down his spine as Ketal watched him intently from behind waiting. Under pressure from his teammate, Cain closed his eyes, trying to use all his survival experience. Ketal's shadow loomed over Cain, creating an invisible but heavy pressure. Sweat beaded on Cain's forehead. He braced himself with the sole determination to survive. A dry clicks echoed, and Cain's eyes snapped open in astonishment. Ketal turned his face curious at the unexpected sound. Tears of relief and joy welled up, and Cain tremblingly touched the open chest. Hayes clasped her hands in front of her chest, her eyes shining with surprise and admiration. Ketal flashed a radiant smile, expressing admiration for Cain's skills. Memories of a difficult life flooded back, making Cain question the path he had chosen for the first time in his life. Ketal held up an item, while Hayes gestured to explain its immense value, astonishing Cain. Ketal smiled with satisfaction after hearing the explanation. He now understood the situation clearly. Ketal called Cain's name, gesturing for him to receive his reward. A trembling hand lifted the sparkling silver cup from the treasure. Cain stared in disbelief at the spoils in his hand, unable to believe his luck. Suddenly, Cain screamed in terror, dropping the cup as the group turned to look at him in confusion. Ketal took a decisive step forward, leading the group. The group, now more vigilant, followed Ketal deeper into the dungeon's darkness. They stopped before a pile of human bones scattered across the ground. Ketal analyzed the situation, pointing out 4 skeletons lying motionless in the rubble. Cain, Alessandro Tyrannus, and Hayes flinched at Ketal's confident assignment. Ketal's eyes flashed with a purple light, a confident smile gracing his lips as he outlined the battle plan. Cain nodded decisively, accepting his role in the upcoming battle. Alessandro Tyrannus and Hayes also nodded grimly in agreement, preparing themselves. Ketal stepped forward, ready to face the threat. In the darkness, an eerie blue light flickered from the eye sockets of a skull. Cain shivered as he witnessed the gruesome sight of bones moving on their own. The group stood firm, facing the skeletons slowly reassembling before their eyes. The 4 skeletons stood fully upright, their eye sockets glowing, ready to charge at the intruders. Alessandro Tyrannus's gaze turned sharp, ready for the impending fight. In the silence, Hayes clasped her hands, eyes closed, as she began to chant an ancient spell. Cain pulled the scarf to cover half his face, revealing only his vigilant eyes, his hand already on the hilt of his dagger. The darkness in the dungeon shattered as an army of skeletons with glowing magical blue eyes simultaneously charged towards them. To clear the way, Cain charged forward, his knife flashing a streak of light, striking directly at the charging skeleton. 2 other skeletons gaped in a silent roar, astonished by the lightning-fast attack. A skeleton was suddenly seized from behind, struggling in vain against Ketal's steel arm. Easily gripping 3 skeletons, Ketal smirked, asserting his control over the battlefield. Undeterred, another skeleton raised a sharp bone, charging straight towards Alessandro. Alessandro raised his shield, a clang of metal echoing as he blocked the skeleton's attack. Hidden behind the sturdy shield, the warrior's gaze remained unwavering, steadfastly holding the defensive line. Alessandro exerted force, slamming his shield onto the ground, creating a small shockwave. Seizing the opportunity, Cain leaped high, descending like a phantom from above, targeting another skeleton. He spun in mid-air, unleashing a powerful horizontal slash that tore through the air. Hayes' eyes glowed a brilliant golden color as she completed her spell. She extended her hand forward, a star-shaped burst of holy energy radiating out, enveloping her teammate. Empowered by magic, Alessandro's entire body glowed, and he swung his sword with superior strength. Alessandro slid across the ground to dodge, while a dazzling beam of light sliced horizontally through the skeleton's position. Despite being destroyed, the broken bone fragments began to automatically crawl towards each other, a grotesque rebirth. The rolling skull reattached itself to the neck, its joints clicking as it regenerated. With a voiceless roar, the skeleton was fully revived, the blue energy around it becoming even more intense. Standing at the back, Ketal merely smiled, a look of amusement on his face at the unfolding scene. He crossed his arms calmly, observing the battle between his teammates and the immortal foes, assessing their skill. A mysterious smile flickered across Ketal's lips as he realized the true nature of these skeletons. Ketal's fist clenched, purple energy beginning to gather around his hand, signaling his impending action. Realizing it was time, Ketal opened his palm, a gesture indicating that the other's performance was over. Meanwhile, Kasan Hark was still fighting, delivering a powerful spinning kick to another skeleton. After the attack, Kasan paused, his eyes reflecting doubt as he noticed something unusual about the enemy. Haze's eyes widened in horror as she realized the true intentions of her barbaric teammate. Alessandro Tyrannus glanced over his sharp gaze, confirming that Ketal was testing them. From the pile of bone fragments, a skeleton's eerie blue eyes glowed once more. It reassembled its body, tilting its head inexplicably at those who had just destroyed it. To end this rebirth, Haze focused her divine energy, her eyes burning with determination. The power from her prayer transferred to Alessandro and Kasan, urging them to fight with all their might. Magic-enhanced slashes continuously swung out, forming a storm of steel that tore through the air. The skeleton's skull shattered, the magical light in its eye sockets fading forever. After the decisive attack, Kasan Hark knelt, gasping for breath from exhaustion. Neither Alessandro nor Haze fared better. They struggled to catch their breath after the intense battle. For a moment, Ketal recalled the sight of his teammates fighting a test they had passed. He remembered the numerous skeleton armies they had faced. With Ketal leading, clearing the path through the dungeon became much easier. Haze anxiously watched Ketal's back, sensing something unusual ahead. Kasan Hark also turned to look at Ketal, a tense silence enveloping the group. Finally, they entered the center of the dungeon, where a knight in black armor sat on a throne. The figure of the skeleton knight loomed majestic and menacing, blocking the group's path. Haze trembled, horror evident on her face as she recognized the enemy's identity. Ketal turned to look at his teammates, awaiting an assessment of the opponent's strength. Overwhelmed by the dark energy, Haze realized this was a monster they couldn't handle. She presented the situation to Ketal, suggesting that retreat was the only option to preserve their lives. A smirk flickered across Ketal's lips, hinting at absolute confidence. He nodded in sarcastic agreement, astonishing the group with his reaction. On the throne, the skeleton knight began to stir, the dark energy around it growing more intense. The visor of the helmet slowly lifted, revealing a skull with eyes glowing red like embers. Leaving his teammates behind, Ketal alone ascended the steps, confronting the skeleton knight directly. A smile of excitement appeared on Ketal's face. He regarded this powerful enemy as an interesting challenge. In response, the skeleton knight gripped its sword firmly, taking a stance, ready for a fight to the death. Haze's eyes widened in horror as she sensed the deadly danger. To protect her teammates, Haze screamed a desperate warning as the skeleton knight unleashed a destructive attack. Haze's light shield cracked under the terrifying power of the dark energy stream. Haze gritted her teeth, bracing herself against the horrifying pressure weighing down on her magic. The final defensive shield shattered into pieces. The shockwave threw Kasan Hark and Haze back, while Alessandro braced himself, raising his shield to absorb most of the attack's force. Blasted back, all three warriors fell sprawling on the ground, exhausted and helpless, while Ketal stood with his arms crossed, observing from behind. A smile of amusement flickered across Ketal's lips as he assessed the situation. Gasping for breath, Alessandro stared straight ahead, completely stunned by the enemy's power with just one blow. The skeleton knight stood tall, its figure exuding a deadly authority, looking down at the defeated. Its glowing red eyes inside its helmet flashed, signaling an impending finishing blow. With terrifying speed, the skeleton knight charged straight towards the group of warriors. Ketal faced the attack, his gaze cold and utterly fearless. Ketal's eyes sharpened, focusing entirely on the charging enemy. Ignoring all defenses, Ketal blocked the skeleton knight's sword with a direct punch. Ketal's punch pierced through the armor, causing the skeleton knight's bony body to explode from within. Alessandro Hayes and Cassan Hark gaped, stunned by the unbelievable sight. Ketal casually cracked his knuckles, looking down at the enemy's remains with disdain. After dealing with the threat, Ketal leisurely stepped forward. He stopped and turned his head, his gaze signaling Cassan Hark. Cassan flinched, hastily responding to his leader's call. Before them was a large, securely locked treasure chest. Ketal gestured for Cassan to open it, but Cassan could only shake his head frantically, explaining in a panic that the lock was beyond his abilities. Cassan bowed his head, his face full of disappointment and shame as he admitted defeat. Without a word, Ketal's eyes glowed with dark energy as he swung his fist towards the chest. Cassan Hark's eyes widened in horror at Ketal's brute force action. Ketal stood there, blowing away the smoke from his fist beside the shattered treasure chest. Alessandro and Hayes were once again speechless, their mouths agape in astonishment at Ketal's problem-solving method. Ketal looked down at the shattered remains of the chest with a smug smile, satisfied with the result of his power. He casually flicked his chin towards Cassan Hark, ordering him to clean up the remains, while he himself did not lift a finger. Cassan Hark flinched and obeyed, his face still shocked and panicked. He looked back at Ketal with a bewildered and skeptical expression regarding his teammates' inexplicable action. The group turned their backs on the battlefield, moving towards the light at the end of the cave. They stepped out of the darkness, and behind them the dungeon's structure began to shake and collapse. Ketal spun around, surprised by the sudden disappearance of the cave. The group hastily retreated as the ground shook violently beneath their feet. Cassan Hark explained that perfectly completing a dungeon would cause it to disappear. Ketal seemed surprised by the concept of a secret room, while Cassan awkwardly confirmed their existence. A smile full of interest and danger spread across Ketal's lips at the prospect of new challenges. Cassan Hark was simply stunned, completely unable to comprehend Ketal's reaction. At a city gate, a guard captain flinched upon seeing the group approach earlier than expected. The majestic city wall stretched out, a symbol of the order and discipline the group was about to face. The guard captain regained his composure, beginning to interrogate the group about their dungeon expedition. Ketal cheerfully gave a thumbs-up, reporting that the expedition was very successful. The guard captain gestured, asking the group to follow him inside to complete the entry procedures. In the interrogation room, Hayes nervously reported the events, trying not to reveal anything unusual. The guard captain clasped his hands, his sharp gaze scrutinizing, considering whether to allow the barbarian to stay in the territory. Hayes hesitated, her eyes darting away when asked about Ketal. The guard captain closed his eyes, contemplating the true purpose of the test, to eliminate disruptive elements. Cassan Hark spoke up in defense, asserting that Ketal was not the type to cause trouble. Alessandro Tyrannus and the guard captain faced each other across the table, the guard still skeptical about Ketal's nature. Ketal began to boastfully praise each member of the group, painting a picture of perfect cooperation. Ketal's unexpected praise surprised the guard captain, as it completely contradicted the usual behavior of forced groups. After some consideration, the guard captain finally made his decision. He stood up, approving the group's entry, but not forgetting to issue a strict warning. The guard captain handed Ketal a bag of reward money, which he happily accepted. Ketal cheerfully held up the bag of reward money, declaring he would share it fairly. Hayes hastily waved her hand in refusal, her smile stiff, while Cassan Hark and Alessandro Tyrannus also averted their gazes with tense expressions. Despite the refusal, Ketal insisted that they were teammates and must share the spoils equally. With a radiant smile, Ketal suggested the group go for a round of drinks to celebrate their victory. Cassan, Hayes, and Alessandro could only force a smile, compelled to agree to his undeniable enthusiasm. The trio's faces became utterly miserable as Ketal dragged them away, as if they were being led to an execution. From a distance, the guard captain observed Ketal cheerfully leading his three gloomy teammates, a dark aura surrounding them. The guard captain's eyes narrowed, analyzing every gesture of the outsider with extraordinary power. In his eyes, Ketal was no longer an ordinary barbarian, but a distinct, almost legendary existence. The guard captain decisively turned and walked away, determined to report immediately. He sternly ordered a guard to stay on watch while he went to meet the Lord. The Lord's mansion appeared majestic under the night sky. Inside, a quill glided across papers by candlelight, indicating that work was still ongoing. An authoritative voice from behind the large chair allowed the outsider to enter. The guard captain entered the great hall, bowing formally before the person seated at the desk. Lord Luke Barkan lifted his head from the pile of papers, his scrutinizing gaze directed towards the newcomer. The guard captain stood upright, reporting the appearance of a barbarian in the territory. Luke Barkan questioned the captain as to why he allowed such a person into the city. The guard captain appeared slightly flustered, admitting that he had assessed the situation as not being a major issue. Luke Barkan leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze fixed on the captain. With a serious expression, the guard captain confessed that the barbarian's power was indeed the problem. Luke Barkan leaned forward, a mix of interest and concern evident as he asked about the extent of that power. The captain recounted that he had learned Ketal defeated a skeleton knight with just one blow. Luke Barkan's eyes widened, unconcealed astonishment clearly visible on his authoritative face. An image of the colossal skeleton knight, enveloped in dark energy, appeared as a testament to its terrifying power. Luke Barkan pondered, trying to understand how a barbarian could possess such extraordinary power. His expression grew tense as he asked if that meant Ketal was a first-rate warrior. The captain affirmed that the possibility was very high, and he might even be stronger. The guard captain bowed his head, sweat beading on his forehead, as he reluctantly admitted the enemy's strength. Luke Barkan pondered, worry etched deep on his face as he considered the threat from an unpredictable barbarian warrior. The captain flinched at the command, his eyes revealing skepticism about the Lord's decision. With unwavering determination, Luke affirmed his desire to witness this potential danger firsthand, despite all risks. Luke glanced towards his personal knight, a figure in black armor, standing tall behind the throne, exuding absolute confidence. The guard captain shivered at the Lord's confidence, his anxiety deepening. Luke turned to the knight, awaiting an assessment from his most trusted guard. The knight clenched his armored fist, his tone exuding absolute contempt for a barbarian he considered ignorant. An illusion of the past appeared where the young knight stood before a great swordmaster, asserting that his swordsmanship was invincible. Luke nodded slightly, approving the knight's confident assessment. With the authority of a Lord, Luke Barkan decisively ordered the barbarian to be summoned for an audience. Meanwhile, at a tavern, a lavish feast of grilled meat and fresh beer was laid out, shimmering under the cozy candlelight. Ketal devoured a piece of roasted chicken leg, enjoying the meal with innocent satisfaction. Sitting opposite Kassan Harkes and Alessandro Tyrannus could only look at each other, misery evident on their faces. A heavy atmosphere enveloped the three companions, in stark contrast to Ketal's cheerfulness. Ketal slammed his beer mug onto the table, an enthusiastic gesture of invitation. He flashed a radiant smile, encouraging his companions to join in the feast he was hosting. Hayes and Alessandro could only respond with a forced smile, their awkwardness unconcealed. Ketal turned to Alessandro, his eyes curious, as he began to question the abilities of the self-proclaimed holy knight. Ketal's curiosity grew as he pointed out that he had never seen Alessandro use any divine power. Cornered, Alessandro awkwardly admitted that his power had not yet awakened. Ketal expressed regret frankly, while Alessandro merely cleared his throat to hide his embarrassment. Undeterred, Ketal turned to Hayes, asking her about the temple of the goddess Calosia, whom she served. Hayes awkwardly explained that her goddess was not welcome in most places. An image appeared depicting Calosia, goddess of lies and deception, a powerful but shunned entity. To change the subject, Hayes quickly clasped her hands, gathering all her courage to question Ketal in return. The question about Ketal's true strength startled both Kassan and Alessandro, their eyes fixed on the barbarian with astonishment and curiosity. Completely oblivious to the tension, Ketal merely looked back blankly, still chewing on a piece of food. In the inn, Ketal curiously questioned his companions about the power ranking system. Hayes hesitantly explained that only a first-rate warrior like Ketal could confront a skeleton knight. Ketal absorbed the information innocently, while Hayes was startled by his sudden closeness. The innkeeper, pale as a ghost, used the closing time as an excuse to drive the intimidating group away. Completely oblivious to the innkeeper's fear, Ketal cheerfully agreed to leave. Before leaving, Ketal turned back to ask about his companion's plan. To avoid going with Ketal, Hayes and Alessandro frantically refused in unison. Cass and Hark also hastily chimed in, emphasizing that they had no free time. Ketal accepted their refusal, innocently smiling and bidding farewell. All three sighed in relief, imagining a permanent farewell to Ketal. Alone in his inn room, Ketal reclined on the soft bed, enjoying the comfort. The innkeeper tremblingly accepted the room fee, relieved that the transaction was complete. He lay relaxed on the bed, comparing this warmth to the harsh snow realm he had left. Memories of solitude in the snow realm flooded back, prompting Ketal to ponder the path ahead. A determination flared in Ketal's eyes. He raised his hand as if to grasp the future and adventures. His mind scrolled through ambitious goals: the elf sanctuary, the magic tower, and the imperial capital. Bright morning sunlight streamed into the room, signaling a new beginning. A loud and insistent knocking broke the silence, startling Ketal awake. Still groggy, he sat up abruptly in bed. At the door, the guard captain stood at attention, speaking formally. Ketal threw the door open, facing the captain and asking why he was there. From a distance, Kassan Hark hid behind a corner, anxiously observing the unexpected encounter. The guard captain solemnly conveyed the summons from the Lord. Ketal envisioned the power of a Lord, one who held the destiny of an entire land. Instead of fear, Ketal appeared excited and cheerfully accepted the invitation. Ketal's innocent reaction completely bewildered and perplexed the guard captain. Seeing the domain in daylight for the first time, Ketal walked through the bustling market. His eyes lit up with curiosity and delight at the lively scene of the city. Ketal flashed an innocent smile full of contentment. He cheerfully gave a thumbs up to the guard captain, who appeared annoyed and confused by Ketal's action. The captain closed his eyes, trying to remain calm and complete his duty. The guard captain stopped before a luxurious threshold, announcing loudly. Standing before a large window, Luke Barkan, the lord of the domain, gestured for them to enter. Ketal and the captain entered the great hall, proceeding towards the magnificent red carpet. Luke Barkan extended his hand, a formal welcoming gesture. The lord introduced himself as Luke Barkan. Ketal responded, taking Luke Barkan's hand in a firm handshake. He raised his head, his eyes sharp, introducing himself as Ketal, while unexpectedly bowing. Luke Barkan's eyes widened, utterly stunned by this unbelievable action. Ketal maintained his bowed posture, an unprecedented act of respect from a barbarian. Luke Barkan broke into a cold sweat, his mind reeling with the thought that a barbarian who only worshipped strength was bowing before him. Regaining his composure, Luke Barkan cleared his throat, gesturing for Ketal to sit down. Ketal sat opposite Luke Barkan, across the large table, while a knight in black armor stood guard solemnly behind the throne. Ketal's eyes darted around curiously, admiring the castle's opulence. His gaze stopped with a hint of surprise. He stared at the dark knight standing guard. An innocent and admiring smile appeared on Ketal's face as he looked at the knight, while the knight's eyes gleamed with vigilance. The dark knight sensed an intense killing intent, his body tensing within his armor. He mistook Ketal's admiration for a threat, his eyes narrowing hostilely as he perceived Ketal's figure emitting a dark energy. To protect the lord, the dark knight's hand tightened on his sword hilt, ready to draw his weapon at any moment. Luke Barkan spoke, his sharp gaze cutting through the tension. He looked directly at Ketal, beginning the interrogation to verify the barbarian's identity. Ketal calmly replied, ready to answer the lord's question. Luke Barkan asked the first question, a direct inquiry about Ketal's origin. Ketal gazed thoughtfully into a distant space, recalling his homeland, a world of ice and white. Ketal's answer stunned both Luke Barkan and the Dark Knight, unable to believe what they had just heard. Luke Barkan looked at Ketal, the image of a legendary warrior appearing in his mind. A drop of sweat rolled down Luke's temple, He remained skeptical of Ketal's incredible tales. Ketal closed his eyes, calmly affirming the truth about the miserable place he had experienced, leaving it to Luke whether to believe him or not. Luke changed his approach, directing his attention to the tea set on the table. Sitting upright on his throne, Luke Barkan looked directly at Ketal, his sharp gaze scrutinizing a silent question about the opponent's true strength. In Luke's mind, Ketal's image appeared menacing, his eyes glowing with dangerous energy amidst the cold night. From a comprehensive perspective, Ketal sat alone on the opposite side of the long table, frankly admitting his lack of understanding regarding the measure of strength in this land. Luke narrowed his eyes, understanding Ketal's meaning. The Dark Knight stood beside him, his cold gaze fixed on Ketal. To verify Ketal's strength, Luke Barkan gestured towards his knight, offering a generously rewarded challenge. Ketal's eyes widened, a pure spark of interest and surprise flashing at the offer. Luke smiled confidently, emphasizing that this was merely a moderate friendly match. Ketal gave an innocent smile, an unhesitating acceptance. Ketal's enthusiasm stunned Luke and the Dark Knight. In Ketal's thoughts, the image of a knight in shining armor appeared standing majestically under the moonlight, a symbol of strength and honor. Ketal raised a hand to his chin, his face full of eagerness at the opportunity to witness a knight's skills firsthand. Luke Barkan gripped the armrest of his throne, believing he had seen through Ketal's true nature. In Luke's eyes, Ketal's excitement transformed into a surge of savage killing intent, his barbaric warlike instinct impossible to conceal. An invisible pressure emanated from Ketal, making both Luke and the Dark Knight wary. The solemn meeting room scene vanished, giving way to a vast dusty arena where strength would be determined. The Dark Knight looked at his opponent with absolute confidence. Ketal responded with a smile full of anticipation. From the stands, Luke Barkan signaled the start of the match, hoping it would end peacefully. He decisively rang the small bell, its metallic sound signaling the official start of the contest. In the arena, the Dark Knight drew his sword, declaring that witnessing his swordsmanship was an honor for Ketal. Ketal smiled in response, a casual agreement. Ketal's relaxed expression made veins bulge on the Dark Knight's forehead. He felt blatantly disrespected. The Dark Knight's fist clenched, a surge of green energy beginning to gather around his hand, signaling an impending attack. Exuding an overwhelming green energy, the Lord's Knight charged forward, his eyes glowing menacingly. Ketal stood firm, his muscular body confronting the silent challenge from his opponent. 3 energy swords suddenly appeared, making Ketal's eyes widen in astonishment. He looked up, completely surprised by his opponent's extraordinary swordsmanship. The energy swords merged, preparing for a fatal strike. With terrifying speed, Ketal moved, leaving 2 blurry afterimages in his original position. The Lord's Knight unleashed 3 simultaneous slashes, targeting both the real and illusory targets. Ketal's 2 afterimages vanished as the blades cut through, while he stood safely in another position, his expression still bewildered. A smug smile appeared on the Lord's Knight's lips. He believed Ketal could only dodge. He continued to charge, unleashing an even faster attack. Ketal clenched his fist, deciding not to dodge anymore. He threw an iron fist, deciding to confront the magic head-on with pure strength. The Lord's Knight's smug expression immediately turned into extreme disbelief. Ketal stood towering over the fallen knight, whose energy sword shattered into pieces. Ketal's hand gripped his opponent's chest armor, lifting him effortlessly. With tremendous force, Ketal slammed the Lord's Knight onto the arena floor. The Lord's Knight lay sprawled on the ground, blood oozing from the corner of his mouth in pain. From his throne, Luke Barkan was speechless, his eyes wide with horror. Ketal's hand relaxed, brushing off dust as if he had just finished a trivial task. A massive crack ran across the ground from where the Lord's Knight lay fallen, a testament to the destructive power of the recent attack. Luke Barkan sat on his throne, silently looking down at his top knight defeated with just 1 blow. Ketal took a decisive step, ending the match. He smiled innocently, looking towards the Lord as if he had just finished a simple game. Luke Barkan remained motionless, his mind blank at the unbelievable sight. He swallowed hard, his gaze sharpening as he began to completely re-evaluate the barbarian before him. His mind replayed the scene of his knight being struck down by an inhuman power. Luke Barkan's expression became pensive. He realized that Ketal's power could overturn the entire world. In the Lord's mind appeared the image of a swordmaster in shining armor standing alongside the illusion of a majestic white dragon. Sitting on his throne, Luke Barkan mused with a worried expression awaiting an important guest. A sudden voice rang out, making Luke Barkan's eyes widen in surprise. Gentle sunlight shone through the open window. Through the thin curtain, the silhouette of an elderly man with white hair appeared, startling Luke Barkan. Luke Barkan turned around, a drop of anxious sweat rolling down his temple. With a stern gaze, Luke Barkan began to explain the reason for this unexpected meeting. Cain stepped forward, his fists unconsciously clenching as he listened to the story, while Luke Barkan continued to present with a solemn expression. Standing with his arms crossed, Swordmaster Cain asked Luke Barkan to get straight to the point he found interesting. Luke Barkan placed his hand on the table, preparing to lead his guest away. To show respect, Luke Barkan bowed deeply before Cain, who sat waiting with a dignified demeanor. Cain's sharp eyes narrowed. He focused on listening to every word from Luke. Luke Barkan closed his eyes for a moment, replaying the horrifying event in his mind before recounting it. In another room, the Dark Knight lay on the bed, wincing from the aftereffects of the match. He startled awake, opening his eyes to see Luke Barkan already standing at the foot of the bed. In a panic, the knight sat up, stammering an explanation of his condition to the Lord. Cain stood behind Luke Barkan, his cold gaze directed towards the disciple lying on the bed. Cain looked at his disciple with disappointment, his voice sternly reprimanding his failure against an unknown barbarian. Cain's eyes sharpened. He began to analyze the situation professionally. He pointed to the torn part of the knight's tunic on his chest, which revealed a completely unblemished chest. Memories of the battle flooded Cain's mind. The image of his disciple's shattered armor, contrasting with Ketal's towering, unblemished figure. Cain turned to explain to Luke and the bewildered disciple that this was not an uncontrolled attack. He firmly concluded that the attacker's strength far exceeded the level of an ordinary knight. Both Luke Barkan and his knight were stunned by that terrifying assessment. Luke Barkan swallowed hard, the truth even more disturbing than he had imagined. He turned to Cain, probing about the power disparity between the Swordmaster and the Barbarian. Cain held his head high, a confident smile fleeting across his lips, asserting that the status of a Swordmaster was untouchable by mere strength. Luke remained skeptical, pointing out that Ketal had displayed terrifying power without using magical energy. Cain rubbed his chin, thoughtfully hypothesizing that such power could only come from warriors of the White Snow Plains. Luke Barkan pondered, his eyes skeptical, as he confirmed the stranger's origin from the White Snow region. Cain narrowed his eyes in assessment, analyzing the nature of the potential threat from the icy land. In Cain's mind, the image of a legendary warrior from the White Snow region appeared, his power emanating a mesmerizing purple aura. Cain stroked his beard, considering the possibility that the individual was not human but a shapeshifter. Images of fierce shape-shifting creatures, a bear and a snake, flashed through his thoughts. Cain shook his head decisively, dismissing his own hypothesis to Luke Barkan's surprise. He reasoned that a true shapeshifter would never show compassion towards humans. Nevertheless, the image of Ketal standing tall amidst the snowstorm still troubled Cain, a big question about his identity and purpose remaining unanswered. Luke Barkan noticed Cain's pensiveness, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. Cain brushed it off, saying it was not urgent, but his eyes briefly glimpsed an image of the Emperor. Memories of a strange mission from the Emperor flooded back, an order related to the distant snow-capped mountains. Cain turned back, reassuring Luke Barkan that it was not a matter to worry about at the moment. He narrowed his eyes decisively, changing the subject to ask about Ketal's current situation. Luke Barkan was slightly startled by the sudden question, but quickly confirmed that Ketal was still within the territory. Cain took a decisive step, resolving to verify it himself. He turned and left, his back exuding unshakable determination. At the same time, in front of a magnificent cathedral, the guard captain began a conversation with Ketal. The captain seemed a bit flustered by Ketal's imposing stature as he was deep in thought. To keep the promise, a pouch of reward money was handed to Ketal. From his throne, Luke Barkan had declared that he would no longer interfere with Ketal's activities within the territory. Ketal touched his chin in thought. He needed an officially recognized identity for easier future movement. The guard captain offered a solution, suggesting Ketal could find a patron or become a mercenary. The image of a free mercenary carrying a battle axe and a banner on his shoulder appeared as a promising path. The captain warned that low-level mercenaries were merely errand runners, but with Ketal's strength, finding a patron would be better. Ketal showed surprise and interest at this new option. The image of a mercenary bravely fighting a giant monster flashed, stirring excitement within him. A determined smile spread across Ketal's lips as he made his choice. Faced with Ketal's determination, the guard captain could only bewilderedly point the way to the guild hall. With a confident smile, Ketal made a straightforward request for directions. The guard captain, completely overwhelmed by Ketal's stature, could only stammer his agreement. Fleeting images depicted the life of mercenaries, an ideal adventure, but also the last resort for those who had nothing left. The harsh reality of the profession appeared through a scene of a warrior being swallowed by a monster in a dark dungeon. Inside the noisy guild hall, a brawl erupted as one man threw a punch at another's face. The victim staggered and fell to the floor, his face clearly showing pain and anger. Immediately he sprang up, his eyes blazing, shouting a challenge. The attacker also did not flinch, his neck veins bulging as he retorted, ready for a fight. Two other mercenaries observed indifferently, casually betting on the outcome of the brawl. Amidst the chaotic space, the two men continued to charge at each other in a cloud of dust. At the reception desk, the pink-haired receptionist turned to ask her colleague about the situation with the new recruits. Rosa, the receptionist, let out a weary sigh, her eyes clearly showing boredom. In her mind, images of peculiar new recruits appeared: an arrogant holy knight, a cunning thief, and an unapproachable nun. The pink-haired receptionist could only show sympathy for her colleague's frustration. Rosa irritably slammed her hand on the desk, wistfully dreaming of a prince who would come to rescue her from this tedious job. The hall door creaked open, and a sturdy fur-lined leather boot stepped in, cutting through the chaos. The unusual sound made Rosa jump and turn her eyes directed towards the door. She froze as Ketal's colossal figure appeared, towering and blocking out the light from the doorway. Paying no mind to the attention, Ketal casually scanned the noisy atmosphere of the guild hall. His presence immediately quelled the brawl. The two troublemakers froze stunned. All the mercenaries in the hall fell silent, their eyes fixed on Ketal with astonishment and apprehension. Ketal turned back his innocent face, not understanding why the entire room had suddenly gone silent. He walked to the counter, looked directly at Rosa, and loudly declared that he wanted to become a mercenary. Rosa, completely shocked, stammered a question to confirm the purpose of the large man in front of her. After Ketal explained that he wanted an official status, Rosa regained her professional demeanor and presented the necessary conditions. Ketal agreed, placing 5 silver coins on the counter, and Rosa began typing on the typewriter to register him. She carefully entered Ketal's information, accepting his vague answer about his age without further questions. Upon completing the procedure, Rosa solemnly presented a golden badge placed on a velvet cushion, officially recognizing Ketal as a mercenary. Ketal paused for a moment, processing the information he had just received. He decisively placed a wooden card on the table, a silent request to join. He leaned forward, his eager eyes clearly showing his desire to start work immediately, which made Rosa a little flustered. Sitting opposite each other, Rosa began explaining the procedures to Ketal. The eagerness on Ketal's face faded, replaced by skepticism, as he looked at the quest list. His gaze swept across the list of trivial F-rank tasks, gathering herbs, cleaning dungeons, sewer streets, and night patrol. Rosa broke into a cold sweat, fearing that the barbarian warrior's pride would be hurt, and he might become enraged. As Rosa was trying to reassure him, Ketal unexpectedly interrupted decisively, pointing to an option. Rosa was stunned, not understanding what was happening. Ketal's finger pointed directly at the gathering herbs quest. Rosa looked up surprised, asking for confirmation, while Ketal casually affirmed that the job needed to be done. Ketal crossed his arms, smiling as he asked about the location to find the herbs. Rosa regained her professional demeanor, presenting an illustrative picture of the herb to be found. Ketal took the picture, confidently declaring he would be back soon. He turned and left the guild hall, beginning his first quest, leaving Rosa still bewildered. The heavy wooden door of the guild hall slowly closed behind Ketal. The pink-haired colleague rushed over to shake Rosa's shoulder, both startled by the strange situation. In the sun-drenched forest, Ketal compared the drawing with the vibrant red flowers growing on the ground. He carefully examined the herbs, his expression thoughtful as he considered their uses. Ketal took off his fur cloak, preparing to get to work. He put on a wide-brimmed straw hat, confidently beginning his first mercenary quest. An hour later, Rosa gasped in astonishment as a huge bag full of herbs was forcefully placed on her desk. Ketal appeared with a cheerful expression, asking if the quantity was sufficient. Rosa's eyes widened, skepticism rising within her. She picked up a few sprigs of herbs, surprised to find them completely intact and fresh. Ketal smugly pointed to himself, asserting his skill, despite his rough appearance, causing Rosa to only nod awkwardly. Rosa placed a silver coin on the wooden tray as a reward alongside a simple meal. Under the sunlight, Ketal carefully held a sprig of herbs, a satisfied smile briefly appearing on his lips as he looked at the fruits of his labor. Ketal smiled contentedly, the image of a rare herb flower appearing above him as a symbol of his achievement. Turning his back to the counter, Ketal boldly requested the next quest, immediately completely surprising Rosa. Rosa was stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief that this man could be satisfied with such a meager reward. Ketal lightly clenched his fist with excitement, his entire body radiating eagerness to continue working while it was still light. Rosa clutched her head in despair, tears welling up as she had to admit that this rookie was truly too strange. Rosa's finger glided across the F-rank quest board, stopping at the next task after the first two items had been crossed out. Rosa swallowed hard, realizing this was the third cleaning job he had taken in just one day. Ketal tilted his head, looking at her innocently, as if not understanding why she hesitated. Trying to regain her professional demeanor, Rosa forced a smile and officially assigned the quest to Ketal. A wooden chair creaked as Ketal stood up, ready to depart. At the warehouse, the veiled owner looked sideways with a cautious expression. Ketal appeared with a radiant smile, declaring he had come to clean the warehouse. The warehouse owner was utterly horrified, her eyes wide, as she realized the person who came to help looked like a barbarian. She took a step back, stammering to confirm she was the warehouse owner as Ketal approached. Without any difficulty, Ketal effortlessly lifted a heavy stack of wooden crates, leaving the warehouse owner frozen in astonishment. Afterwards, Ketal diligently swept the path, his strength inadvertently creating a large cloud of dust that made passers-by cough violently. From a distance, Cain squinted through binoculars, observing Ketal's every action. Through the binocular lenses, Ketal's face appeared clearly, still full of concentration. Cain lowered the binoculars, his face clearly showing confusion, unable to understand why someone with extraordinary power would do such mundane tasks. In Cain's thoughts, Ketal appeared with a gigantic energy orb powerful enough to destroy an entire kingdom. Back in reality, Ketal was still diligently sweeping with a broom and dustpan, a strange contrast to his latent power. Cain was completely baffled, confusion etched deeply on his face. Having finished the work, Ketal wiped the sweat from his brow, a satisfied smile spreading across his face amidst a floral backdrop. A pair of sparrows chirped on a branch, reflecting Ketal's peace and contentment. Back at the guild, Ketal clenched his fist, feeling tired yet satisfied after a day of hard work. He placed his bare feet on the wooden floor, a sign that he had removed his dirty boots after a day's work. Ketal placed the reward pouch on the counter, a hint of surprise on his face as he held it in his hand. The reward pouch for 15 quests lay solitary on the tray, an achievement that seemed disproportionate to the effort expended. Ketal's eyes gleamed with excitement as he secretly observed from a hidden corner. Rosa smiled brightly, extending her hand to receive the payment pouch from Ketal. With a satisfied smile, Ketal clenched his fist, promising to return tomorrow. A contented smile briefly crossed Ketal's lips as he began his second day in the civilized world. On the street, a child burst into sobs in an adult's arms. The surrounding residents looked at each other with expressions of horror and confusion. Ketal strode confidently on the stone path, his appearance causing a woman to startle and step back. His fur-collared boots stopped abruptly on the ground. Ketal paused, his gaze directed to one side with surprise. Before him was a large, dignified building, a library. The jingle of a doorbell rang out as Ketal pushed the door open and entered. A female librarian with scholarly glasses looked up, about to offer a greeting. Ketal's towering figure loomed over her, causing the librarian to stiffen with fear. The towering bookshelves stood silently like mute witnesses to the encounter. The old book pages were filled with dense text, preserving the knowledge of many generations. Contrary to his intimidating appearance, Ketal sat down smiling as he turned the pages of a book. The librarian was frozen at the counter, her eyes fixed on the strange man diligently reading. From a hidden corner, Cain squinted, skepticism evident as he saw a barbarian reading a book. Completely unaware he was being watched, Ketal was engrossed in the world of words. His finger traced the cover of the book titled History. The page turned, taking Ketal back to memories from a few years ago, where Milena Akasha appeared exhausted. The image of the Empire's red banners appeared, symbolizing a powerful force. An imperial army in full red armor stood in formation, exuding discipline and ruthlessness. The memory of a swordmaster in blue and gold armor shattered like a mirror. Ketal mused, hand propping his chin as he pondered the Empire's dominance. Pushing aside thoughts of worldly affairs, his eyes gleamed with curiosity about another topic. He reached for another book, its cover bearing the words non-human. Ketal eagerly turned the pages of the new book, ready to explore the mysteries of other races in the world. The pages revealed an image of a dwarf's cave sparkling with rare minerals. Next was the scene of a fairy village filled with green hues and fluttering butterflies. A magnificent city floating amidst the clouds appeared, and finally, the mysterious sanctuary of the elf tribe, a place no one could set foot in. The silhouette of a mysterious figure with glowing eyes appeared, emphasizing the inviolability of the sacred land. In the library, Ketal smiled smugly, his finger lightly tapping his chin as if contemplating an ambitious plan. After reading about the sanctuary, his expression suddenly shifted to extreme astonishment as he turned to a new page. He leaned close to the book, eyes wide with curiosity. The book revealed the existence of demon realms, places filled with anomalous creatures and inaccessible to humans. The image of a gloomy, deathly forest appeared, illustrating one of those demon realms. A fiery abyss with formidable chained creatures was described as the place that dragged the world into evil. Next was a world at the bottom of the deep sea, where ancient creatures resided. A deep, empty black hole, a realm of absolute nothingness, appeared before his eyes. Finally, an image of a vast white snowfield appeared where figures with glowing eyes stood. Another demonic realm was mentioned. Ketal leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful as he looked up at the ceiling, overwhelmed by the vastness of the world he had just discovered. After finishing reading, Ketal decisively stood up, gathering the stack of books on the table, startling the librarian. He turned a radiant smile on his face and nodded to the librarian to express his gratitude. The librarian was startled, stammering and nodding profusely, a forced smile mixed with confusion at the strange guest. Ketal left the library, the sound of the door chimes ringing as he stepped out into the light. At the guild hall, Ketal confidently walked to the counter, startling Rosa before she quickly regained her professional demeanor to greet him. Rosa smiled kindly, handing Ketal a quest request form, which he eagerly took. In a dark room, Swordmaster Cain squinted at a document, his face full of contemplation. He tightened his cloak, a decision having formed in his mind after reading the tracking log about Ketal. He would act himself. Night fell, enveloping the town in silence under the full moon. Ketal walked on the cobblestone path, satisfied with the fruits of his labor. He lifted the money pouch, feeling its weight, with a contented nod. Striding down the deserted road, Ketal's gaze was fixed forward, full of hope for a future as a true mercenary. From the shadows, Cain stood motionless, his silence carrying a menacing weight as he observed Ketal. Sensing someone, Ketal abruptly stopped, turning his head with a curious and wary expression. Cain's shadow stretched long, towering and imposing, his cold gaze locked onto Ketal in the unexpected confrontation. Ketal abruptly stopped on the deserted street, turning to face the figure who had been following him. Cain was startled, not expecting his stealth to have been discovered. Ketal crossed his arms, his gaze scrutinizing, demanding an explanation for the tailing. Cain was stunned, his confidence in his ability to conceal his presence completely shattered. Assuming silence was an admission, Ketal cracked his knuckles, a dry sound, echoing like a warning. He smirked his cold eyes, concluding that the tale was merely a robber. Cain broke out in a cold sweat, trying to find an excuse for his identity as a swordmaster, but to no avail. Ketal looked at Cain with pity, muttering about the difficult economic situation that forced even the elderly to resort to robbery. He pondered thoughtfully, an idea suddenly flashing in his mind. He flashed a smug smile, envisioning the reward for capturing a robber. Cain was utterly bewildered by the escalating misunderstanding. Realizing Ketal truly believed he was a robber, a bold idea sparked in Cain's mind. Seeing this as a golden opportunity to gauge Ketal's true strength, Cain clenched his fist, deciding to accept the challenge. Ketal crouched, preparing to lunge. Cain tensed, focusing intently to counter the impending attack. Ketal lowered his body, channeling power into his leg. In a blink, Ketal vanished from his spot, leaving only a blur on the stone ground. Cain panicked as his target suddenly disappeared right before his eyes. He frantically darted his eyes around, unable to sense Ketal's whereabouts. Ketal's figure suddenly loomed directly behind Cain, a deadly presence he was completely unaware of. Ketal reached out, aiming straight for the nape of Cain's neck. To avoid being seized, a surge of green energy erupted from Cain's feet, pushing him away. The push helped Cain narrowly evade Ketal's hand. Ketal paused, a fleeting smile of amusement appearing on his lips. He turned a smile of appreciation on his face, impressed by his opponent's speed. Cain fell to the ground, sweat pouring from him in terror at having almost been caught. He sat on the ground, his eyes still wide with horror, as he realized Ketal moved without revealing any energy. Ketal looked at Cain with amusement, while Cain swallowed hard, his initial confidence completely vanished. Deciding to test his opponent, Cain unleashed a fierce surge of green energy from his body. Instantly, Ketal materialized from nothingness, his white hair sweeping past in silence. His speed was so great that the surrounding scenery was merely a blur. Before Cain could react, Ketal had firmly grasped his wrist, his eyes emitting a cold purple light. Cain froze, disbelief evident on his face, as he realized all his senses had been completely bypassed. Ketal's hand tightened like an iron vice, neutralizing all of Cain's movements. Cain realized he was not only captured, but also being dragged by an irresistible force. He gritted his teeth, tensing his entire body to resist in desperation. In response, Ketal merely gritted his teeth slightly, an action indicating he had not yet used his full strength. Cornered, Cain roared and unleashed all the accumulated energy in his body to break free. Ketal merely glanced down, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, as the green energy enveloped him. Cain's energy surged violently around his restrained arm, but it could do nothing. Ketal's entire body absorbed the energy flow without a single scratch, his gaze at Cain filled with impression. A small energy burst flashed, and Ketal voluntarily released his hand. Cain staggered back a few steps, trying to regain his balance after the recoil. The residual green energy on Ketal's hand then dissipated into the air. Cain looked at his opponent, his initial confidence completely gone, replaced by a serious and wary expression. Ketal stood there nonchalantly, shaking his head as if commenting on a mediocre skill. In Cain's mind, images of peak warriors who could materialize mana appeared, a technique he couldn't believe was being used for robbery. Ketal, completely unaware of Cain's thoughts, flashed an innocent and amused smile. Ketal's naivety left Cain utterly speechless, unable to comprehend the situation. Cain recalled the destructive power of materialized energy, capable of tearing apart even hardened steel. Yet Ketal, standing before him, took the full force of it, with his bare skin, without a scratch, a smile still on his lips. Realizing the unimaginable power disparity, Cain stepped back, hand on his sword hilt, preparing for a life-or-death battle. Ketal took a decisive step forward, signaling that it was time to end this charade. With no other choice, Cain drew his sword from its sheath in a swift motion. Cain's eyes widened in horror at what happened next. Ketal had stopped the sharp blade with just one finger, his smile still unwavering. Cain launched a fierce attack, but his sword was easily blocked by Ketal, causing a violent shock. Cain gritted his teeth, veins bulging on his temples, as he put all his strength into the attack. With an incredibly gentle gesture, Ketal used his index finger to push Cain's sword hilt, making him tremble with helplessness. Cain's eyes flashed with extreme astonishment at his opponent's unimaginable strength. Ketal's eyes emitted a terrifying surge of energy, his figure obscuring Cain's vision. Cain froze, cold sweat pouring from him as he realized his inevitable end. Ketal's hand shot out with terrifying speed, a powerful movement. Ketal calmly looked at his neutralized opponent. With a curious expression, Ketal grabbed the unconscious Cain's cloak, examining his spoils. A red-haired guard froze in place, his mouth agape in astonishment at the sight before him. Ketal dropped Cain to the ground. He lay motionless like a sack. Standing in the middle of the road, Ketal casually carried Cain with one hand, terrifying the nearby warehouse owner. The guard trembled, trying to understand why the great swordmaster was attacked by a barbarian. The guard screamed in extreme panic and confusion. Ketal flashed a radiant smile, proudly presenting the thief he had just caught. Confusion enveloped the guard. He couldn't find words to describe this bizarre situation. The guard was completely stunned, his mind blank at the absurd sight. In the guard's mind, the image of Swordmaster Cain appeared majestic, a legend of superhuman strength. The harsh reality emerged as he saw that very legend being carried away disgracefully. Trying to remain calm, the guard stammered that the man was not a thief. Ketal raised an eyebrow, his sharp gaze indicating he suspected the guard was an accomplice to the criminal. Ketal took a decisive step forward, asserting his stance. To show absolute respect, the guard bowed deeply and solemnly called out Swordmaster Cain's name. Ketal blinked, his expression bewildered upon hearing that noble title. Cain could only bow his head in silence, sweat pouring down from shame. Ketal looked down at Cain with skepticism, unable to believe that someone with such a title was a thief. To protect Cain's honor, Ketal firmly declared that he had attacked him to steal money. The guard adamantly refuted, asserting with certainty that it was indeed the swordmaster, and there could be no mistake. The guard tried to rationalize the situation, suspecting that swordmaster might just be a nickname for thieves. Ketal stood before the confused guard, with the unconscious Cain still slung over his shoulder. In response to the guard's skepticism, Ketal firmly asserted that the person he apprehended was indeed a swordmaster. After a moment of shock, the guard decided to report this unbelievable incident to the Lord. In the great hall, Luke Barkan sprang from his throne, his face utterly shocked upon hearing that Swordmaster Cain had been defeated. In a luxurious room, Ketal bowed his head, showing remorse for his thoughtless actions. Facing him, Cain also bowed, admitting partial responsibility for not explaining clearly. An awkward silence enveloped them as they sat facing each other. Luke Barkan and the guard entered the Lord, looking utterly bewildered by the strange scene. Luke Barkan expressed his astonishment. He had anticipated a duel, but never expected Cain to be the loser. The guard recounted the events, emphasizing that Cain had indeed been defeated by Ketal. Luke Barkan and the guard came to a terrifying conclusion. Ketal was even stronger than a swordmaster. In Cain's mind, he admitted he had only just reached the threshold of superhuman strength. Ketal's image appeared in Cain's thoughts, terrifying and uncontrollable, enveloped by a menacing purple aura. Luke Barkan rubbed his temples, his tired expression signaling that he would let the two resolve the misunderstanding themselves. The Lord turned and left, leaving Ketal and Cain to their private space. The room became silent, with only the two men sitting opposite each other. Ketal stared at Cain with curious eyes, making Cain break out in a cold sweat from tension. Cain tremblingly raised his teacup, the humiliation of an absolute defeat still deeply etched in his mind. Regaining his composure, Cain set down the teacup and solemnly introduced himself as Swordmaster Cain. Ketal innocently tilted his head, asking directly if Swordmaster was Cain's surname. After hearing the explanation, Ketal seemed to understand and immediately asked about the technique Cain had used. Cain flinched, his eyes wide at Ketal's direct and unexpected question. In response, Cain spread his hand, and a mystical green energy began to gather around it. Ketal's mouth fell open, his eyes gleaming with extreme astonishment and delight. He realized Cain's skill was not a trivial trick, but something incredibly fascinating. Cain explained that it was a manifestation of mysticism, a type of energy called aura. Memories of the battle flooded back. Ketal recognized that energy and leaned forward eagerly, asking how to learn it. To illustrate, Cain created a mystical green energy orb in his palm, explaining how to control and manifest it. Ketal listened intently, his face clearly showing curiosity as he tried to connect the new concept with what he already knew. Cain continued to explain, and images of mystical energy divided into aura for swordsmen and mana for mages appeared in the space. A confident smile spread across Ketal's lips as he realized both disciplines could use this type of energy. Ketal's sudden offer to be taught the technique left Cain completely stunned and speechless. To emphasize his earnestness, Ketal sprang to his feet, bowing towards Cain with fiery eyes, an undeniable plea. Cain, still confused, asked again why someone stronger would seek guidance from him. Leaning back casually in his chair, Ketal admitted that he knew nothing about swordsmanship or mystical energy, simply fighting by instinct. Ketal's confession stunned Cain, but then his expression became resolute, realizing this was an opportunity to prove the worth of a swordmaster. Regaining the demeanor of a master, Cain decided to teach this barbarian the path of swordsmanship to restore his honor. He stood up solemnly, his silver hair flowing, asserting that a swordmaster without a sword in hand was only half a person. Ketal nodded, then innocently remarked that was why Cain looked weak, leaving the swordmaster speechless, as if struck in the heart. Cain tried to remain calm awkwardly, agreeing with Ketal's blunt assessment. Ketal continued to analyze frankly, saying he found it strange that a swordmaster had such power. He added, crossing his arms, that if Cain had used a sword, he might have won, making the swordmaster begin to doubt his own decision. With an eager smile, Ketal expressed his anticipation, completely unaware of the invisible pressure he was placing on Cain. A bead of anxious sweat trickled down Cain's temple. He wondered if his self-respect would truly be restored. To begin the lesson, Cain evoked images of ordinary swordsmanship and illusory swordsmanship, emphasizing the difference between them. Cain stood upright, hand on his sword hilt, asking Ketal what he had seen when fighting his disciple. Memories of the battle flooded Ketal's mind. The image of the knight Cain's disciple clearly appeared with a three-part attack. Ketal touched his chin in thought, then nodded, finally understanding the meaning of materialization that Cain mentioned. Cain confirmed, explaining that his swordsmanship leaned towards finesse rather than brute force. He raised his sword, declaring that swordsmanship was the art of combining sword and aura to use mystical power, and one who reached its peak was called a swordmaster. A brilliant green aura flared, enveloping Cain's sword blade, radiating astonishing power. Ketal's eyes lit up with excitement. He exclaimed in utter astonishment at the sight he was witnessing for the first time. Cain cleared his throat, still a bit skeptical about the situation, then decided to demonstrate directly so Ketal could clearly understand. Cain's gaze sharpened. He swung his sword, creating a green streak of light that tore through the air. The ground cracked under the power of the slash, debris flying everywhere. Ketal watched in stunned silence the destructive power of the attack. A green energy slash ripped through the air, splitting into multiple destructive rays. The stone wall behind cracked and smoked under the power of the attack. Cain lowered his sword, explaining that the aura could be used to create illusions, and a stream of green energy coiled around the blade to illustrate. He held his head high, his eyes full of pride, asserting that only his swordsmanship could transform those illusions into physical entities. Ketal looked directly at Cain, his eyes sparkling with admiration, yet equally confident, then bluntly declared that he too could perform that technique. Cain was stunned, the confidence on his face shattering into extreme skepticism. In Cain's mind, Ketal's image appeared as an arrogant and absurd declaration. Memories of a lifetime of arduous training in swordsmanship flooded back, and the master's pride within Cain was deeply wounded by such arrogance. Instead of words, Ketal tightened his grip on his weapon's hilt, his gaze fixed on Cain, as if to say that action would be the quickest answer. Ketal hoisted a massive battle axe onto his shoulder with a smug smile, leaving Cain utterly bewildered. He took a decisive step, the red carpet beneath his feet seemingly trembling under his weight. Ketal assumed a stance, raising the battle axe high, preparing for a full-force attack. With terrifying speed, he unleashed a series of slashes, the axe blade leaving only blurred trails in the air. Cain's eyes flashed with recognition. He roared in astonishment as he realized it wasn't sword technique, but pure strength and speed. Ketal's axe swing concluded, leaving a deep furrow on the carpet and stone floor, extending to the end of the room. The energy from the strike exploded at the end of its path, blowing away bricks and stones. Cain's mouth hung open, utterly speechless at the terrifying destructive power just displayed. As the dust settled, the axe remained still in Ketal's hand, glowing hot. Ketal hoisted the axe onto his shoulder, offering a challenging smile and awaiting Cain's acknowledgement. Cain silently conceded the image of Ketal, swinging the axe at dizzying speed, appearing in his mind an overwhelming display of power that almost deceived a master. Regaining his dignified composure, Cain looked directly at Ketal, pointing out that it was merely a weapon swing completely devoid of technique. Ketal raised an eyebrow, pragmatically arguing that as long as the result was similar, the purpose of combat had been fulfilled. Ketal's sharp and straightforward argument left Cain momentarily unable to retort, only able to narrow his eyes in annoyance. Cornered, Cain reluctantly admitted to himself that Ketal was not wrong, but this only made his pride boil. To reassert his status, Cain tightened his grip on his sword hilt, intense determination flaring in his eyes. He sprang into action, his body splitting into countless green illusions, each a perfect sword strike engulfing Ketal. Ketal's eyes widened in horror, unable to believe what he was witnessing. Countless illusory slashes converged, creating a storm of green energy that shattered the floor into fragments. From above, Cain and Ketal stood facing each other in a massive crater. The ground around them cracked like a spiderweb. With the confident posture of a master, Cain turned his back, expounding on the pinnacle of swordsmanship. He turned back, his sharp gaze piercing Ketal, an unspoken challenge issued. Ketal merely shifted his foot slightly, a small movement, but full of implied acceptance. In response, Ketal stepped forward, the battle axe ready in his hand, prepared to prove his point. He swung the axe high, his muscles rippling in a powerful motion. A vortex of energy erupted from the axe swing, tearing through the air around Ketal. Cain was frozen, his eyes wide in disbelief at the spectacle of pure power unfolding. Ketal continued to spin, creating a fierce maelstrom from a series of continuous slashes. The energy vortex grew larger, swirling with destructive power. Finally, the vortex condensed into a dark purple energy sphere, shaking the ground. Amidst the dissipating smoke and dust, Ketal stood firm, a smug smile on his lips, as if inquiring about the outcome. Utterly shocked, Cain knelt screaming in extreme panic. He completely collapsed, wailing in despair, as his lifelong pride in swordsmanship was overshadowed by brute force. Skepticism and pain were evident on Cain's face. He could not accept the harsh truth. Tears of despair streamed down the old swordsman's face. Ketal crossed his arms, a hint of disappointment in his eyes as he observed Cain's reaction. He frankly admitted that Cain's swordsmanship was astonishing. Cain started looking up, a tear still lingering on his cheek. Ketal pragmatically explained that what he had just done was not technique, but merely swinging the axe very quickly. Cain stood up, realizing that Ketal's technique was not an illusion, but a reality created by extraordinary speed. He clenched his fist, a new determination rekindled from the ashes of his pride. Regaining his confidence, Cain asserted the unique value of his technique, the ability to transform illusions into reality. With the fire of determination blazing in his eyes, He declared that his technique had no flaws. Cain analyzed that Ketal's strength was extraordinary, a madness, far exceeding human limits. Ketal, deeply impressed, unexpectedly bowed and humbly offered to be taught true swordsmanship. Cain was stunned by the offer, not expecting such a sudden change in attitude. Regaining the solemn demeanor of a Master, Cain cleared his throat, accepting his new role. Cain raised a hand, a surge of green energy flaring in his palm as he began his lecture on power control. His explanation evoked the image of a mage and a swordsman, both needing to awaken mystical energy to reach their peak. Ketal tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with curiosity, as he brought up a distinction regarding divine power. Another illusion appeared. Haze was praying behind him, the majestic silhouette of a deity demonstrating directly bestowed power. Ketal nodded slightly, a flicker of understanding appearing on his face. Cain continued to explain, a brilliant green energy sphere, appearing to illustrate the concept of mysticism, intrinsic power. Cain extended his energy, emitting hand towards Ketal, inviting him to feel its essence as the first step to possessing all types of power. With an air of erudition, Cain raised a finger, emphasizing that there were 5 stages to mastering this energy. Ketal raised a question, and Cain affirmed that innate talent was a prerequisite to being able to perceive it. Cain explained that those who could only perceive energy were classified as the lowest rank. An abstract image appeared depicting an energy entity with 5 emblems flying around it, symbolizing the 5 ranks of power. Cain's lecture was illustrated with an image of Milena Akasha, who represented one of the higher ranks. Ketal's gaze suddenly became distant, as if he was connecting the lecture to a past experience. Cain dismissed the complexity of the classification system, advising Ketal that understanding the basic concept was sufficient. After Ketal nodded in understanding, both stood up, ready for the practical session. With a serious expression, Cain declared the first lesson to be sensing mysticism. Cain closed his eyes, signaling Ketal to follow suit and perceive everything around him as an entirely new sense. Following the instructions, Ketal closed his eyes, trying to focus all his senses. His mind was guided to feel the wind sweeping through the lush green trees and the ground beneath his feet. Cain instructed Ketal to seek a distinct presence moving within the breeze. He sat down in a meditative posture, a faint stream of energy beginning to fluctuate around his body. The energy stream suddenly extinguished the ground beneath Ketal's feet, cracking from uncontrolled pressure. Ketal opened his eyes, shaking his head in disappointment, leaving Cain stunned in surprise. Cain's face showed clear skepticism. He couldn't believe that someone so powerful couldn't perceive energy. To illustrate this anomaly, Cain conjured an image of another muscular warrior who could easily perceive energy. Cain rubbed his chin thoughtfully, wondering if this was a strange characteristic of people from Ketal's homeland. Memories of his compatriots flooded back. Dongduinu and Greta Ketal explained that the concept was completely foreign to them. Cain sat opposite Ketal, extended his hand, and offered to directly transmit his energy to open up the path of perception for him. Ketal looked at Cain with an eager and innocent expression, asking about the energy transmission. Cain calmly confirmed, his eyes filled with the sagely wisdom of a master. Urged by Cain, Ketal was anxious but still ready for the lesson. Cain stepped closer, preparing to begin the instruction. With a confident demeanor, Cain stood behind Ketal, signaling him to relax his body and focus on his senses. To probe, Cain placed his hand on Ketal's shoulder. Immediately, Cain's eyes narrowed in extreme astonishment. His mind reeled as he felt an absurdly dense mass of muscle. He recoiled skeptically, wondering if this was the body of a human. Ketal turned around, bewildered by his master's strong reaction. Cain quickly composed himself, waved his hand, and signaled to start over. He closed his eyes, concentrating as a stream of green energy began to gather around his hand. Cain's energy enveloped Ketal, an attempt to awaken and guide the latent power within him. Cain watched intently, believing Ketal would soon find the path. Suddenly, the confident expression on Cain's face vanished. Surprise quickly turned into doubt as he received no response. He could not find the path to the mystical power within Ketal's body. His energy seemed lost in a bottomless abyss, crushed by an invisible pressure. Cain squeezed his eyes shut, sweat pouring as he admitted defeat. He cleared his throat, trying to hide his embarrassment and regain the dignified demeanor of a master. Ketal was startled by the silence, his expression shifting from focused to bewildered. Fear surged and he questioned Cain, worried that he had no talent at all. Cain explained that, to find mystical power, the student must discover the path within themselves. Ketal nodded, but still appeared confused. He pointed to his chest, asking again with skepticism. Ketal's face was stunned, unable to believe his inability to sense energy. Cain extended his hand, trying to calmly explain to his bewildered student. Finally, Cain revealed the shocking truth. Ketal's body was too different to the point where he couldn't verify anything. Cain explained with a serious expression, admitting that Ketal's extraordinarily dense body had blocked all his attempts to guide energy. Ketal's face fell, a drop of sweat rolling down his temple as he realized he might never learn mystical power. Ketal turned back and asked with an innocent expression, and Cain could only admit that he couldn't confirm anything. To offer a solution, Cain suggested other paths, such as seeking more skilled swordmasters or visiting the magic tower. Cain placed his hand on his chest, sincerely expressing regret for not being able to help. Ketal pondered for a moment, then his eyes lit up, showing that he had not given up hope. Cain's hand clenched, a significant decision forming in his mind. Ketal flashed a radiant smile, expressing sincere gratitude for what he had learned. Cain observed in silence, his eyes reflecting deep contemplation as he re-evaluated the barbarian young man before him. Cain's memories flooded back with images of violent, bloodthirsty barbarians, those who lived only to plunder and destroy. The image of an elf mother clutching her child, recoiling in horror from the shadows of the invaders, appeared in his mind. Cain looked directly at Ketal, realizing that this young man was completely different from his prejudices. With a decision made, Cain extended an offer, inviting Ketal to settle in this kingdom. Ketal appeared surprised by the unexpected offer, asking Cain to explain further. Cain solemnly placed his hand on his chest, promising to sponsor Ketal so he could obtain a high title and status in the kingdom. Without a moment's hesitation, Ketal turned away and flatly refused the offer. For a moment, Cain envisioned Ketal becoming an ultimate weapon, helping his kingdom escape the Empire's domination. Cain tried to persuade him one last time, emphasizing the noble status Ketal could achieve. Ketal merely hummed softly, seemingly considering the offer. Suddenly, Ketal crossed his arms, grinned and declared that he would only pursue his own pleasures. Cain's eyes widened in shock, completely unprepared for that answer. Ketal scratched his head, bewildered by Cain's reaction, while the old swordmaster stood frozen, unable to comprehend. Ketal extended his hand with a friendly smile, asserting that he would never forget Cain's kindness. Cain could only stand and watch sweat trickling down his temple as Ketal departed. Cain's solitary figure trudged through the vast empty corridor. Cain stopped, his face full of contemplation, as he realized he had entertained a truly ridiculous thought. Memories of Ketal surfaced not as part of a group, but as an individual completely independent, with his own will. Cain let out a sigh, finally accepting that Ketal was a free, uncontrollable force. From above, Cain stood alone on the balcony, his gaze fixed downwards in deep thought, his face full of concern about the Emperor's command. Luke Barkan sat on the throne, his hands clasped, his expression calm, but concealing deep contemplation at the information about the conquest of the demon realm. In a formal meeting room, Cain questioned Luke Barkan, his attitude showing strong opposition to the useless loss of human lives. Cain asserted his stance decisively, his eyes full of sarcasm, as he speculated about the Emperor's ambitions. He continued to present, emphasizing that the kingdom still had many unresolved issues within its own territory. Luke Barkan listened, a drop of sweat rolling down his temple as he realized the validity of Cain's warning. Cain looked sternly at Luke Barkan, warning that a summons from the Emperor could arrive at any moment. After hearing Luke Barkan's thanks, Cain leaned back in his chair, wearily rubbing his forehead at the madness of the world and the Emperor. Luke Barkan flinched, his face showing confusion and worry at Cain's attitude. To clarify the matter, Luke Barkan leaned forward, his eyes sharpening, inquiring about a disturbing rumor. Cain confirmed the rumor was true, asserting that demonic activities were becoming increasingly evident. Luke Barkan's eyes widened, completely shocked by Cain's confirmation. Cain's warning was illustrated by images of dark monsters rising from the shadow. Another terrifying vision appeared, a winged demoness riding a colossal white serpent, signaling an inevitable invasion. Cain snapped out of his thoughts, realizing that the threat was no longer in the future. Luke Barkan silently agreed, anxiety clearly etched on his face. Cain looked directly at the Lord, asking a direct question about a certain individual. Luke Barkan bowed his head, admitting that he had no definitive answer. He looked up, asserting that at least the person was not hostile, but the image of Ketal appeared as an unpredictable enigma. The scene shifted to a bustling city, red flags fluttering under the brilliant sunlight. Ketal confidently strode down the cobblestone path, his muscular physique and barbarian attire drawing all eyes. Ketal was momentarily confused as a mother quickly pulled her child away, her eyes filled with fear. Another passerby also startled and turned away, unable to hide their panic at Ketal's presence. Ketal stopped, his face thoughtful, as he noticed the reactions of those around him. He pondered deeply, trying to find the reason why people were afraid of him. Misunderstanding was etched on his face as he watched a wealthy couple also hastily turn away. Ketal's eyes flashed with a spark as he came to a conclusion. Ketal clenched his fist, his face radiant with a new resolve to find and buy more suitable attire. Inside, a luxurious wardrobe, suits hung neatly on wooden racks. Square fabric samples in various colors were meticulously stacked, shimmering under the light. A tailor was adjusting a suit on a mannequin, smiling in welcome as the doorbell rang. The tailor's face stiffened in shock, eyes wide, as if struck by lightning in the background. Ketal stood towering before the tailor, his eyes glowing menacingly as he made his request to buy clothes. The tailor cowered, stammering a polite refusal, explaining that the shop did not have sizes suitable for Ketal's physique. Seeing Ketal's disappointment, the tailor quickly offered a solution, suggesting he would custom-make clothes for him. Ketal's face brightened considerably, and he happily accepted the offer. The tailor broke into a cold sweat, trying to force a professional smile while promising to get back in touch. The tailor was plunged into horror, imagining an angry customer tearing apart the suit and his own tragic fate if the product was unsatisfactory. Leaving the tailor shop, Ketal walked on the stone path, his face a little confused. His eyes were suddenly drawn to a small blue object shimmering on the ground. Ketal bent down his gloved fingers, carefully picking up the gem. He brought the gem up to eye level, curiously examining the strange object. In his palm, the gem suddenly glowed brightly, revealing a swirling world of energy within. Ketal narrowed his eyes, his face thoughtful as he sensed the gem's power. He shrugged, deciding to put the gem in his pocket and inquire about it at the guild. At the reception desk of the mercenary guild, Ketal held out the gem before Rosa. Rosa looked up with a confused expression at his question. Ketal placed the gem in her palm, explaining that he had found it on the road. Sitting opposite Ketal, Rosa began to examine the gem, admitting that it looked far from ordinary. She noted that its smooth, polished surface indicated it was a crafted item, not a natural stone. Rosa's gaze was fixed on the gem, noticing it had no engraved name, but exuded an indescribable preciousness. Her mind seemed to be drawn into the orb, her eyes becoming vacant as she was mesmerized by its energy. A decisive snap of fingers echoed right in front of Rosa. Rosa startled, her pupils contracting, breaking free from the trance. Ketal leaned forward, his eyes showing clear concern as he asked if she was all right. Still shaken, Rosa looked at Ketal, explaining that she felt as if her mind had just been drawn into the orb. Rosa surprisingly pointed to herself, but Ketal shook his head decisively, indicating it was a misunderstanding. Rosa carefully examined the mysterious blue gem, sensing a strange energy and offering to appraise it for Ketal. With a confident smile, Ketal gestured a refusal, his eyes sparkling with amusement as he wished to uncover the gem's secrets himself. Ketal set the gem aside, shifting his focus to finding quests, and Rosa immediately turned to retrieve the form. She placed a list of quests on the table, consisting only of manual labor tasks, such as street cleaning and potato harvesting. Ketal looked through the list, a satisfied smile spreading across his lips as he accepted the seemingly mundane task. After a day's work, Ketal relaxed in his lodging, his face content with the fruits of his labor. His relaxation vanished. He raised the gem, his eyes thoughtful, as he tried to understand its true nature. The image of Rosa with vacant eyes, mesmerized by the gem, suddenly flashed in Ketal's mind. A sudden realization made Ketal's eyes widen. He felt something was amiss. He sprang up as a whispering, eerie voice emanated from the gem in his hand. His mind plunged into an illusory space where he stood alone in the night forest, the mysterious voice continuing to echo. Returning to reality, Ketal realized the gem not only spoke but also emitted a guiding light, a kind of directional magic. In his palm, the gem glowed brightly, the eerie invitation becoming clearer and more urgent. He silently looked out at the night through the window, curiosity and caution warring in his eyes. After a moment of thought, determination became clear, and he decided to follow this mysterious call. Venturing deep into the night forest, Ketal pushed aside a branch, his face annoyed as the voice in his head incessantly urged him on. His footsteps were steady on the path, moving forward without hesitation. Suddenly, he stopped, a strange sensation making him wary. Before him was a pitch-black cave entrance, from which a cold magical energy emanated, signaling his destination. Facing the ominous entrance, a confident and enigmatic smile briefly appeared on Ketal's lips. From deep within the cave's darkness, a pair of glowing blue eyes flashed, observing the newcomer. Ketal stepped across the cave threshold, his voice challenging, demanding that the one who called him reveal themselves. Immediately, blue energy chains rose from a magic circle beneath his feet, binding Ketal tight. An ancient voice echoed throughout the cave, declaring Ketal a sacrifice and a crescent-shaped charm containing the glowing blue gem. From the shadows, the skeleton mage emerged, its eyes flaring with magical fire, signaling the imminent start of the ritual. At the center of the magic circle, the skeleton mage raised its staff, high purple energy converging, preparing for the resurrection ritual. Memories of a chaotic era flooded back, revealing an image of an evil sorcerer who once controlled kings like puppets before being defeated by heroes of the past. In the flashback, a valiant red-haired warrior pointed his sword at the evil sorcerer who was kneeling in defeat. Just before dying, the sorcerer's soul managed to transfer into a jar, transforming him into an immortal lich. In its new skeletal form, the skeleton mage cackled sinisterly, beginning its resurrection plot. It hid near a secluded domain, releasing magical orbs to collect life force from unsuspecting victims. Before a colossal mana core, the skeleton mage spread its arms, preparing for its plan to conquer the world once more. The memories faded, revealing a secluded valley where the skeleton mage had chosen its lair to recover its power. Inside a cave, Ketal looked around with a confused expression, not understanding why he was there. From afar, the skeleton mage observed Ketal's image through a magic mirror, surprised by the presence of a barbarian. It recalled how it had placed an enchantment on the gem to lure those incapable of resistance. The skeleton mage smugly assumed Ketal was just an ordinary barbarian, completely ignorant of mysteries. It beckoned with a magical flame, a deathly invitation for the one it believed had fallen into its trap. Ketal walked through the darkness of the cave, moving forward decisively. He stopped before a colossal stone door, the entrance to the mage's lair. A pair of pink fur-collared slippers on Ketal's feet looked utterly out of place with the ominous setting. Ketal's eyes widened in astonishment as he faced the scene inside. The skeleton mage stood there in a majestic form, its eyes in their bony sockets flashing with magical light. Ketal's initial astonishment vanished, replaced by a spark of excited realization. In Ketal's mind, the image of a legendary lich appeared, an ultimate villain. The skeleton mage was flustered, a drop of sweat rolling down his cheekbone as he realized Ketal was not enchanted. Ketal glanced at the shattered skeletons on the floor, his eyes flashing with an understanding of this deadly trap. With a bewildered look, the skeleton mage deduced that Ketal must possess an extremely powerful mind-protecting artifact. He gaped in astonishment, unable to believe that a barbarian could possess such an item. Ketal merely shrugged, a simple gesture of denial, that made the skeleton mage even more suspicious. The gem on the skeleton mage's staff flared with an angry light, his patience having run out. He demonstrated his intent by using magic to crush a nearby skeleton. The shattered bone fragments on the floor began to tremble and reassemble themselves under his power. The skeleton mage raised his staff, ordering his newly resurrected army of skeleton warriors to destroy the intruder. A skeleton warrior charged towards Ketal, and the battle began. Ketal smirked, seemingly having grasped the entire situation within the Lish's lair. A skeleton warrior lunged, swinging its sword aggressively at him. Ketal easily blocked the attack with his bare hand, his strength shattering the skeleton's sword. From the shadows, the skeleton mage narrowed his eye sockets, astonished by the intruder's power. The first skeleton warrior disintegrated into dust after Ketal's counterattack. Ketal looked towards the mage, with a disdainful gaze showing disappointment at the weak opponent. The skeleton mage's bony jaw clenched in silent fury at the insult. He raised his hand in command, and a new army of skeleton warriors rose from the ground surrounding Ketal. Ketal stood firm amidst the encirclement, his expression completely unfazed. He clenched his fists, preparing for a swift massacre. Ketal charged into the skeletal horde, each of his punches carrying destructive power. He delivered a powerful spinning kick, shattering a skeleton into pieces. A straight punch from him pierced through another skeleton's ribcage, causing it to crumble. Ketal slammed a punch into the ground, creating a shockwave that blew away the surrounding skeletons. The skeleton mage gaped in horror, unable to believe the sight before him. Ketal stood amidst the pile of bone fragments, crushing a remaining skull with his foot to assert his absolute victory. He turned to look at the mage, his eyes full of provocation, as if mocking his weak power. The skeleton mage roared in silent rage, Ketal's mockery having pushed him to his limit. Provoked to the extreme, the mage raised his staff, deciding to unleash his trump card. Ketal observed a smirk on his face as he saw his opponent finally getting serious. The gem on the mage's staff glowed with surging dark energy. From the ground, a new form was created from bone and magic, much larger and more terrifying. The smug look on Ketal's face vanished, replaced by surprise, as he recognized the new threat. A skeleton knight in full armor stood tall, its eye sockets emitting an eerie glow. Ketal's surprise quickly turned into curiosity and amusement as he assessed the new enemy. The skeleton mage pointed towards Ketal, ordering the skeleton knight to destroy the intruder. The skeleton knight charged, its sword swinging, radiating a deadly aura. Ketal clenched his fists, a challenging smile on his lips, ready to engage. With a provocative smirk, Ketal charged forward, determined to test the skeleton knight's endurance. His punch tore through the air, striking directly against the skeleton knight's armor. A burst of purple energy engulfed everything, and the skeleton knight shattered into fragments. From the wreckage, a plume of purple magical smoke billowed up, signaling a new threat. The shadow of another skeleton warrior appeared, forming from the eerie mist. The skeleton warrior lunged out of the smoke, its eyes glowing menacingly. Ketal smirked, his eyes gleaming with amusement at a new challenge. From afar, the skeleton mage's eye sockets flashed with a silent command, ordering his minion to attack. At the command, the skeleton warrior unleashed a fierce surge of blue magical energy towards Ketal. Ketal was engulfed in the energy storm, his expression showing a hint of surprise at its power. The skeleton mage observed the battle, his eye sockets narrowed in calculation. He gaped with his bony jaw, extreme astonishment evident as Ketal remained standing. Ketal was pushed back by the force of the explosion sliding across the ground. Ketal lunged forward, delivering a thunderous punch to the skeleton warrior's head. His punch tore through the air, creating a streak of purple energy. The second skeleton warrior shattered under Ketal's absolute power. Ketal stood firm, his cold gaze sweeping across the desolate battlefield. The skeleton mage was stunned, his jaw practically dropping in horror. Another plume of magical smoke rose, signaling a new minion. Ketal crushed the skull of the newly appeared skeleton warrior with his foot, an act full of contempt. He shrugged, his expression showing clear disappointment, as if the challenge was too easy. His gaze swept across the space, directly challenging the hidden mastermind. The skeleton mage's eye sockets narrowed, a silent question forming as he tried to understand Ketal's nature. In the mage's mind, Ketal's energy signature appeared completely transparent with no trace of magic. Confusion was evident on Ketal's face. He didn't understand why his opponent was hesitating. The skeleton mage turned his back, a reluctant acknowledgement of his opponent's power. Ketal's eyes narrowed, wary of the enemy's sudden change in demeanor. The skeleton mage clenched his bony fist, green magical energy beginning to gather around his fingers, signaling he would personally enter the fray. From the perspective of the fallen skeleton mage, Ketal stood tall above him, his cold gaze asserting his victory. Suddenly, a surge of dark energy rose, making Ketal turn back in surprise. He staggered off balance, pushed back by an unseen force. In the darkness, the skeleton mage's eerie blue eyes glowed, emanating a silent threat. The skeleton mage had risen, pointing his staff towards Ketal as a condemnation of the intruder. Ketal scratched his head with a confused expression, innocently pointing at the orb on his opponent's staff, implying it was what led him here. The skeleton mage froze, caught off guard. He explained that his magical orb had attracted everyone to this place, including Ketal. Provoked, the skeleton mage roared in anger, declaring his mighty identity as Kato's Brainulus Kessi. Ketal was confused, an image of elf queen Marseria Hashia Karsia flashing through his mind, wondering about the trend of long names in this world. To assert his power, Katos channeled energy into his staff, determined to turn Ketal into a sacrifice for his magic. Ketal looked up, directly facing the incoming surge of magic. A vortex of dark energy filled with mournful whispers enveloped Ketal. But when the vortex dissipated, Ketal still stood firm, completely unharmed. His pupils spun like a vortex, completely neutralizing the mind attack. This was a type of emotion-gnawing magic, dragging victims into an abyss of despair until their minds shattered. Katos was smug, believing no barbarian could resist his magic. But upon seeing Ketal completely calm, the sorcerer began to realize there was something unusual about his opponent. To probe, Katos snapped his bony fingers, issuing an invisible command. From the ground, a skeleton warrior began to emerge, enveloped in blue magical energy. The summoned minion was complete, sword in hand, charging straight towards Ketal. Ketal stood still, feet firmly planted on the ground, awaiting the attack. The skeleton warrior charged with terrifying speed. Ketal's eyes flashed with purple light. He prepared to counterattack. To demonstrate the minion's uselessness, Ketal delivered a lightning-fast kick to its chest. The skeleton warrior shattered into pieces in midair. Ketal turned his gaze fixed on Katos, full of defiance. Katos froze his jaw, dropping in utter horror at Ketal's incredible power. A fierce energy explosion shook the space, blowing away dirt and rocks. Katos recoiled in extreme disbelief, his jaw slack, his eyes disbelieving the failure of his mind control magic. Ketal stood opposite, a provocative hand gesture, mocking the sorcerer's repeated skeleton strategy. He let out a long sigh, his weary expression clearly showing disappointment with his opponent. Overwhelmed by rage, Katos roared silently as Ketal closed in and seized his bony wrist. In Katos's mind, images of past victims falling before his magic resurfaced, contrasting with Ketal's naive question about basic spell. The comparison was an insult, causing Katos to snarl, deciding to unleash his true power. Dark energy began to gather around his bony body, a chaotic flow signaling an impending catastrophe. A colossal swirling orb of darkness formed from the tip of Katos's staff. With a silent roar, he unleashed his full power, releasing a destructive wave of magic to engulf everything. Ketal's eyes widened, sparkling with childlike excitement, as he witnessed the display of magical power. The dark wave collided with an invisible white light, halted just before reaching Ketal. A gigantic skeletal hand, a symbol of the mind attack, reached out to devour Ketal's soul. Amidst the roaring magical storm, Ketal stood firm as a mountain, unyielding. A faint aura enveloped him, effortlessly neutralizing the entire attack. Katos threw his head back and laughed, maniacally confident of absolute victory. His laughter was abruptly cut short by a dry cough from exhaustion, his bony hand clutching his mouth. His entire body went limp, collapsing to the ground after exhausting his magical energy. He gasped for breath, reassuring himself that despite overexertion victory was surely his. But when he lifted his head, a cold bead of sweat trickled down his bony forehead as he saw the scene before him. Ketal's figure stood tall and unharmed, completely overshadowing the image of Kartos sitting broken on the ground. Ketal tilted his head, looking down at the fallen sorcerer, a naive question evident in his eyes. Horror choked Kartos. His eye sockets widened to their maximum as he faced the unbelievable truth. Memories of a great hero who had been completely defeated by this attack resurfaced, further highlighting the absurdity before him. Ketal placed a hand on his chest, shaking his head in confusion, acknowledging the impressive attack, but its lack of effect on him. Kartos's confidence completely crumbled, leaving only utter horror at the creature he could not comprehend. Ketal's fingers tightened around the axe handle, a simple action that contained a declaration that the time for magic was over. Ketal hoisted the battle axe onto his shoulder, a confident and deadly smile spreading across his lips, signaling that the game had turned.